My rich wife threw me out of a moving vehicle after believing her daughter's lies 3 weeks later. She asked if I'd reflected instead. I handed her divorce papers. Her daughter lost it. My name is Adrian Cross, and let me tell you something right off the bat. I used to be the kind of guy who believed in happily ever after. Yeah, I know, laugh it up. Here I was, 38 years old, thinking I'd figured out the secret sauce to marriage. Turns out, the only thing I'd figured out was how to be a grade A sucker. For 6 years, I thought Miranda and I had something real. Something that could weather any storm, survive any crisis, outlast any of those reality TV marriages that crash and burn faster than a NASCAR wreck. We weren't those people, I told myself. We were different. We were solid. We were completely screwed, but I didn't know that yet. Picture this. It's a Tuesday evening in October, and I'm sitting in the back of Miranda's ridiculous luxury SUV. A gleaming black Escalade that cost more than most people's annual salary. The leather seats smell like money and Miranda's expensive perfume. That Chanel stuff she orders from Paris because apparently, the American version isn't good enough for her delicate sensibilities. The whole vehicle screams, "Look at me, I'm important," which should have been my first red flag. But hey, love makes you blind, deaf, and apparently dumber than a box of rocks. We're coming back from dinner at some pretentious restaurant downtown where they serve portions so small you need a magnifying glass to find them on your plate, and the waiter talks about the chef's vision like he's the next Picasso instead of some guy who charges $40 for 3 shrimp and a garnish. But Miranda loves that scene, loves being seen in those places, loves the way other diners recognize her and whisper about her success. And me? I just went along with it because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You support their dreams, even when those dreams involve paying restaurant prices that could fund a small country's defense budget. That's when her daughter decided to drop her little bomb. Lila, sweet, innocent, 20-year-old Lila, who had about as much sweetness in her as a rattlesnake with a hangover. This kid had been gunning for me since day one, treating me like I was some kind of home invader who'd wandered into their perfect little mother-daughter paradise and refused to leave. Never mind that Miranda and I met 2 years after her divorce. Never mind that I'd bent over backward trying to build a relationship with this spoiled princess. Never mind that I'd paid for half her college tuition without so much as a thank you card. In Lila's world, I was the villain, and she was just waiting for the perfect moment to write me out of the story. So there we are, cruising through the city in our mobile status symbol, when little Miss Sunshine leans forward from her seat. I can still smell her perfume. Some trendy garbage that probably cost more per ounce than gold, mixed with the lingering scent of whatever overpriced cocktail she'd been nursing at dinner. Her voice, when it came, had that particular tone that every man learns to fear. Sweet on the surface, poison underneath. "Mom," she said, and I swear I could hear the smile in her voice. "We need to talk about Adrian." Miranda glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and I should have seen something in her eyes right then. Some flicker of doubt. Some crack in the foundation I thought we'd built together. But I was too busy being annoyed with Lila's dramatics to notice that my wife was already halfway to believing whatever garbage was about to spill out of her daughter's mouth. "He's been stealing from you," Lila continued, each word dropping like acid on my marriage. "I've been watching, and I know what I've seen. He's only here for your money, Mom. He doesn't love you. He loves your bank account." Now, let me pause here for a second to appreciate the sheer audacity of this accusation. Me? Stealing from Miranda? I was the guy who insisted on separate checking accounts because I didn't want anyone thinking I was some kind of gold digger. I was the guy who paid for groceries with my own credit card, who bought my own clothes, who drove my own beat-up Honda because I refused to let anyone say I was living off my wife's success. I was so paranoid about appearances that I probably bent over backward more than a circus contortionist trying to prove I wasn't after her money. But here's the thing about lies. They don't have to be true to be effective. They just have to land at exactly the right moment, hit exactly the right insecurity, push exactly the right button. And Lila, evil little mastermind that she was, had found Miranda's button and pressed it like she was calling for an elevator. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to point out the obvious flaws in this ridiculous accusation, to remind Miranda of all the times I'd proven my loyalty, my love, my complete lack of interest in her finances beyond wanting her to be happy and secure. But Miranda's voice cut through the air like a blade. Stop the car. Those 3 words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not, Adrian. What do you have to say about this? Not, Lila. That's a serious accusation. Just stop the car. Like I was suddenly toxic waste that needed to be disposed of immediately. Our driver, some poor guy named James who probably saw more family drama than a soap opera scriptwriter, dutifully pulled over to the curb. We were on Riverside Drive. I remember that detail with crystal clarity, because sometimes trauma burns the stupidest details into your brain. There was a streetlight casting everything in that sickly orange glow, and I could see a homeless guy pushing a shopping cart on the sidewalk, probably wondering what kind of reality show nonsense was about to unfold in front of him. Miranda, I said, and I hated how my voice sounded. Desperate, confused, like a man who'd just realized he'd been playing a game where nobody bothered to tell him the rules had changed. You can't seriously believe. Get out. 2 more words. That's all it took to end 6 years of marriage, 6 years of what I thought was love, 6 years of building a life together. 2 words from the woman who used to tell me I was her anchor, her safe harbor, her better half. 2 words that turned me from husband into stranger in the space of a heartbeat. I tried one more time, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Miranda, please, just listen to me for 1 second. That's when she snapped. Maybe it was the stress of the accusation, maybe it was some deep-seated doubt that had been festering for months, or maybe she was just tired of pretending our marriage was something it wasn't. Whatever the reason, my calm, collected, always in control wife completely lost her mind. The door swung open, and before I could process what was happening, Miranda's perfectly manicured hand connected with my chest in a shove that would have made a linebacker proud. Now, I'm not a small guy, 6'2", about 190 pounds, reasonably athletic for a man pushing 40. But physics is physics, and when you're not expecting to get launched out of a moving vehicle by your wife, even a slow-moving vehicle doesn't give you much chance to stick the landing. I tumbled out of that Escalade like a sack of potatoes, my body hitting the asphalt with all the grace of a meteor impact. The world spun, gravel bit into my palms, and I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the door slam shut, heard the engine rev, heard the sound of my marriage driving away at about 40 miles per hour. I lay there on the side of Riverside Drive, watching those taillights disappear into the night, and I swear I could see Lila's silhouette in the back window, probably smiling like she'd just won the lottery. Which, in a way, I suppose she had. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Me out of the picture, her mom all to herself, and the satisfaction of knowing she'd destroyed a man's life with nothing more than a few well-placed lies. The homeless guy with the shopping cart stopped and asked if I was okay. A stranger showed more concern for my well-being in that moment than my wife of 6 years had. Funny how the universe works sometimes, isn't it? You know what's funny about getting thrown out of a moving car by your wife? The first thing that goes through your mind isn't, oh my God, I could have died, or even, I can't believe she just did that. Nope. The first thing I thought, lying there on the cold asphalt with gravel embedded in my palms like some kind of twisted acupuncture, was, I really hope nobody got this on video. Because that's where we are as a society, folks. Even in our most humiliating moments, we're worried about going viral for all the wrong reasons. The homeless guy, let's call him Charlie, because he looked like a Charlie, helped me sit up and asked if I needed him to call someone. I almost laughed. Call who? My wife, who just used me as human garbage disposal. My stepdaughter, who was probably already posting about this on Instagram with some caption like, trash takes itself out #blessed. My mother, who lived 3 states away and had never liked Miranda anyway. Yeah, that conversation would go well. Hey mom, remember how you said Miranda seemed cold? Well, turns out you were right. And also she just tried to turn me into roadkill. Charlie stuck around while I took inventory of my injuries. Scraped hands, bruised ribs, what felt like road rash on my left elbow, and an ego that had been run over by a metaphorical 18-wheeler. Nothing that would kill me, but enough to make sitting on concrete feel like a 5-star spa treatment compared to standing up. You want me to call the cops? Charlie asked, pulling out a phone that looked like it had survived the apocalypse. That looked like assault to me. Assault. The word hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? My wife of 6 years had physically shoved me out of a moving vehicle. If some random dude had done that to me, I'd have pressed charges faster than you could say lawsuit. But this was Miranda, the woman who used to make me coffee in the morning and kiss my forehead when I had a headache. The woman who cried during Hallmark commercials and insisted we adopt a rescue dog because everyone deserves a second chance. Apparently, everyone except her husband. Nah, I told Charlie, though every rational brain cell I had left was screaming at me to document this mess. Not yet. Not yet. Like I was saving up my revenge for a special occasion. 2 more people stopped before the ambulance arrived. A middle-aged woman named Janet who worked as a nurse and insisted on checking my pupils for signs of concussion, and some college kid who kept asking if I wanted him to post about this on TikTok to raise awareness about domestic violence. I appreciated the sentiment, but the last thing I needed was to become a cautionary tale set to trending audio clips. The ambulance showed up about 20 minutes later, which in city time might as well have been the speed of light. The paramedic who hopped out was this stern-looking Latino guy, probably in his 50s, with the kind of mustache that meant business. His name tag read Diego, and he had the air of someone who'd seen every possible way humans could screw up their lives. What happened here? Diego asked, kneeling down to examine my scraped hands with the efficiency of someone who'd bandaged up half the city. My wife threw me out of her car, I said, because what was the point of sugarcoating it? Literally. Diego raised an eyebrow that could have launched 1,000 memes. She threw you out of a moving car? Well, it wasn't exactly moving fast, I said, like that somehow made it better. Maybe 10, 15 miles per hour? More of an aggressive ejection than attempted murder. Uh-huh. Diego started cleaning the gravel out of my palms with the gentle touch of someone who'd perfected the art of causing the least amount of additional pain. And why did she do that? Her daughter told her I was stealing from her. Were you? No. Did you tell your wife that? I tried. She wasn't in a listening mood. Diego nodded like this was just another Tuesday for him. You want to file charges? There it was again. That question. The one that would turn this from a really bad marriage fight into an actual legal situation. The one that would make this real in a way that going home and sleeping it off couldn't fix. I shook my head. Not yet. All right, Diego said, applying some kind of antiseptic that stung like hell. But you should get checked out at the hospital. Could have internal injuries, and head trauma doesn't always show symptoms right away. I'm fine, I insisted, which was probably the biggest lie I'd told all day, and considering my wife had just accused me of being a thief, that was saying something. No, you're not, Diego said matter-of-factly. Nobody's fine after getting tossed out of a car by someone they trusted. But you're not bleeding internally, so that's a start. He finished bandaging my hands and handed me a card. That's my supervisor's number. You change your mind about filing charges, you call that. Sometimes people need time to process before they're ready to do what needs doing. The ride to the hospital was a blur of forms and questions and nurses who looked at me with that particular combination of sympathy and judgment reserved for men who end up in emergency rooms because of domestic disputes. They x-rayed everything, poked and prodded me like a science experiment, and eventually declared me bruised but not broken. Physically, anyway. It was almost midnight when I finally made it to the Sunset Motor Lodge, a place that generously described itself as affordable accommodations, but was basically where hope went to die. The room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, with a carpet that had seen things no carpet should see and wallpaper that looked like it was held up by pure stubbornness. I sat on the edge of the bed, which creaked like it was personally offended by my weight, and finally checked my phone. 17 missed calls, all from numbers I didn't recognize. 43 text messages. 67 notifications from social media. My heart jumped for about half a second, thinking maybe Miranda had come to her senses and was trying to apologize. Maybe she'd realized that her daughter was a manipulative little snake and wanted to make things right. Maybe we could still save this train wreck of a marriage. But no, not a single message from Miranda. Instead, I got to scroll through a parade of messages from mutual friends, acquaintances, and random people who'd apparently heard about my sidewalk faceplant through the miracle of modern gossip networks. And the cherry on top of this humiliation Sunday, Miranda had posted about it. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even a hey, maybe throwing my husband out of a moving car was a bad idea. Nope. She'd posted a photo of herself looking triumphant with the caption, "Sometimes you have to cut the dead weight to move forward." Feeling blessed and free. Hashtag new chapter, hashtag know your worth, hashtag buy. Feeling blessed and free. That's what 6 years of marriage boiled down to in her mind. Dead weight that she'd finally had the courage to dump on the side of the road. The comments were even better. Her friends and followers cheering her on like she'd just won a marathon instead of committed vehicular assault. You're so brave. He never deserved you. I always knew something was off about him. I turned the phone face down and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked remarkably like the outline of my shattered dignity. Tomorrow, I'd have to figure out what came next. Tonight, I just had to survive the humiliation of being turned into social media entertainment by the woman who used to promise me forever. The worst part? A tiny voice in the back of my head was wondering if maybe they were all right. Maybe I really was just dead weight. Maybe Miranda really was better off without me. But that voice got smaller as the anger got bigger. Because even if I was dead weight, even if I was the worst husband in the history of marriage, nobody deserved to be thrown out of a car like garbage. Nobody. You know what nobody tells you about being suddenly homeless in your late 30s? Everything you own starts to feel incredibly stupid. Like, why did I need 17 different types of coffee mugs? Why did I keep that broken blender for 3 years, just in case I figured out how to fix it? And why, for the love of all that's holy, did I own so many novelty t-shirts that I never wore, but couldn't bring myself to throw away? These were the deep philosophical questions occupying my brain as I stood in Marcus Lee's spare bedroom, surrounded by the pathetic collection of belongings I'd managed to salvage from my former life. Marcus, bless his army-trained soul, had taken one look at me showing up on his doorstep at 2 in the morning looking like I'd been hit by a truck, because technically, I had been hit by an Escalade, and just stepped aside to let me in. Beer or whiskey, he'd asked, like those were the only 2 options for dealing with life's catastrophes. Which, honestly, they probably are. We'd served together in Afghanistan about 15 years ago, back when we thought we knew what real problems looked like. Turns out, dodging IEDs was nothing compared to dodging your wife's emotional shrapnel. At least in a war zone, you know who the enemy is supposed to be. Marcus lived in one of those converted warehouse apartments that screamed, bachelor with commitment issues. Exposed brick walls, minimal furniture that looked like it came from the clearance section of whatever store sold industrial chic to guys who watched too much HGTV. The spare room was basically a glorified closet with a futon that had seen better decades, but it beat the hell out of the Sunset Motor Lodge and its ode to desperation. So, Marcus said on my first morning there, handing me a cup of coffee that could have stripped paint, "You gonna tell me what happened? Or do I have to guess? Because right now I'm thinking either you robbed a bank or your wife finally snapped." "Door number 2, I said, and proceeded to give him the whole sordid tale. Marcus had met Miranda exactly twice, once at our wedding and once at a barbecue where she'd spent the entire time complaining about the smoke getting on her designer dress. He'd never been a fan, but he'd been too polite to say anything. Well, too polite and too smart, because criticizing a man's wife is a good way to lose a friend, even when you're right. "Jesus Christ, Adrian," he said when I finished. "She threw you out of a moving car?" And posted about it online. The posting might actually be worse than the throwing, I admitted. At least when she threw me, it was in the heat of the moment. The posting was premeditated humiliation. Marcus shook his head like he was trying to clear water out of his ears. "And you're not pressing charges because I'm an idiot?" "Well, yeah, but specifically what kind of idiot?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What kind of idiot was I? The kind who still loved the woman who'd literally thrown him away? The kind who thought maybe, somehow, this could all be fixed? The kind who was too proud to admit his marriage had been a complete disaster from day one? All of the above, probably. The days started blending together after that. I'd wake up on Marcus's futon feeling like I'd been run over by the same Escalade all over again, drink his industrial-strength coffee, and then spend the day pretending to job hunt while actually refreshing social media like some kind of digital masochist. Miranda's online victory tour was in full swing. Every day brought new posts about her journey of self-discovery and learning to value herself. Photos of her at yoga class, at brunch with friends, at some spa getting treatments that probably cost more than most people's rent. All accompanied by captions that made her sound like she'd just escaped from prison instead of throwing her husband out of a car. The worst part was watching our mutual friends choose sides. And guess what? Team Miranda was winning by a landslide. Apparently, I'd been upgraded from husband to that guy Miranda had to get rid of in the court of public opinion. People who'd eaten dinner at our house, who'd laughed at my jokes, who'd acted like they genuinely cared about me. Suddenly they were treating me like I had some kind of contagious disease. Sarah from Miranda's book club unfriended me on Facebook. Tom from our couple's dinner group blocked me on Instagram. Even my dentist's office called to reschedule my appointment, and I'd bet good money Miranda had something to do with that too. Meanwhile, Lila was having the time of her life. Her social media had transformed into some kind of victory parade, with posts about toxic people and protecting family and other inspirational garbage that probably came straight from whatever self-help book she was reading this week. She'd even changed her profile picture to one of her and Miranda hugging, with a caption that read, "My queen crown #Mother knows best #Real recognize real." Real recognize real. Coming from a 20-year-old who'd never held a job longer than 6 months, and whose biggest accomplishment was convincing her mother to pay for her spring break trip to Cancun. That was rich. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Eventually, you either dig deeper or you start climbing. And somewhere around day 10 of my exile, staring at yet another social media post about Miranda's glow up, something shifted inside me. I was sitting in Marcus's living room, laptop balanced on my knees, when I came across a post that made my blood pressure spike to stroke levels. It was a picture of Miranda and Lila at some fancy restaurant, raising champagne glasses in a toast. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings and the courage to leave the past behind. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. Wastebasket sparkles. #blessed. #motherdaughter. #new chapter." The trash takes itself out. That's what I was to them. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of supporting Miranda's dreams, 6 years of trying to build a relationship with her poisonous daughter, and I was trash that had taken itself out. "You okay over there?" Marcus asked, looking up from whatever military documentary he was watching. "You look like you're about to have an aneurysm." "Just peachy," I said, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. Living the dream. Marcus muted the TV and turned to face me. "All right, real talk time. How long are you going to do this to yourself?" "Do what?" "This." He gestured at me like I was a particularly disappointing science experiment. "Wallowing." Refreshing her social media every 5 minutes. Acting like a kicked dog hoping she'll let you back in the house. "I'm not." "Yes, you are. And it's pathetic." Marcus had never been one to sugarcoat things. "You want to know what I think?" "Not really, but you're going to tell me anyway." "Damn right I am. I think you're sitting here feeling sorry for yourself because it's easier than admitting you're pissed off. And you should be pissed off, Adrian. That woman didn't just break up with you. She humiliated you. She turned you into entertainment for her social media followers. She threw you out of a car like you were a McDonald's wrapper." He was right, of course. I was pissed off. Furious, actually. But fury felt dangerous, like if I let myself really feel it, I might do something stupid. Something that would prove Miranda and Lila right about me being the villain in their story. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Key her car? Post revenge porn? Become one of those guys who shows up at their ex's workplace with a boombox? How about you stop acting like a victim and start acting like a man who got screwed over?" Marcus said, "How about you fight back?" Fight back. 2 words that would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. 2 words that would transform me from roadkill into predator. But that night, lying on the futon and staring at the ceiling, all I could think about was how easily 6 years of my life had been erased. How quickly love could turn into contempt. How efficiently I'd been edited out of the story Miranda was telling about her life. Well, if she wanted to rewrite history, 2 could play that game. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Whoever came up with that phrase obviously never had their life blown up by a 20-year-old sociopath and her enabling mother. Because let me tell you, when you're sitting in your buddy's spare room surrounded by bankers' boxes full of paperwork, revenge doesn't feel cold at all. It feels like the slow burn of a really good bourbon going down, warm, steady, and guaranteed to mess you up if you're not careful. Marcus's words had been bouncing around in my head for 3 days. Stop acting like a victim and start acting like a man who got screwed over. Simple advice, really. The kind of thing that sounds obvious when someone else says it, but feels revolutionary when it finally clicks in your own brain. So I did what any rational man would do when his life gets turned upside down by false accusations. I dug out every single document I'd carefully filed away over the past 6 years. Bank statements, business contracts, property deeds, investment records, insurance policies, receipts for major purchases, even those stupid warranty cards I'd filled out religiously because you never know when you might need them. Turns out, you need them when your wife tries to rewrite history and pretend you were nothing but a leech sucking her dry. The dining table in Marcus's apartment looked like a forensic accountant had exploded all over it. Piles of papers sorted by year, by category, by relevance to the case I was building in my head. Marcus took one look at the organizational chaos and whistled low. Damn, dude. You keep better records than the IRS. Military training, I said, though honestly, it was more like paranoid training. Growing up with a father who'd been screwed over in his own divorce had taught me to document everything. Paper trail tells the real story. And what a story it was telling. See, here's what Miranda and her precious daughter had conveniently forgotten when they decided to paint me as some kind of fortune hunter. I wasn't just some random guy who'd wandered into their lives with empty pockets and big dreams. When Miranda and I met, I was already doing pretty well for myself. Not rich by her standards, but comfortable. I had my own house, my own car, my own savings account, and a consulting business that was actually turning a decent profit. But love makes you do stupid things. Like selling your house to help your new wife buy her dream home. Like investing your savings into her boutique business when the initial investor backed out. Like co-signing loans and putting your credit on the line because we're partners now and partners support each other. The evidence was all there, spread across Marcus's table like a very expensive jigsaw puzzle. Bank transfer records showing my money flowing into Miranda's accounts. Business documents with both our signatures, establishing me as a partner in her precious boutique, not just some employee she could fire at will. Investment statements showing joint accounts where my contributions were clearly documented. My favorite discovery was a folder labeled Property Records that contained the deed to our house. Excuse me, Miranda's house, according to her social media narrative. Funny thing about that deed, it had both our names on it. Equal ownership, established when we bought the place together using the proceeds from selling my house, plus a chunk of Miranda's inheritance from her grandmother. But the real gold mine was the business records. Miranda's boutique. Yes, she'd actually named it that, because creativity was never her strong suit, had been hemorrhaging money when I'd stepped in. The initial business plan was about as realistic as a unicorn farm, and the first year's financials looked like someone had been using the cash register as their personal piggy bank. That's when I'd suggested we restructure everything. Bring in a real accountant, establish proper inventory controls, create an actual marketing strategy instead of just hoping people would stumble across her store and fall in love with overpriced scarves. I'd even rolled up my sleeves and handled the marketing myself, designing the website, setting up social media accounts, negotiating with suppliers. The turnaround had been pretty impressive, actually. Within 18 months, we'd gone from losing money every quarter to showing a healthy profit. The business had tripled its customer base, expanded to online sales, and even opened a second location. Miranda had gone from stressed-out boutique owner on the verge of bankruptcy to successful entrepreneur with a growing empire. But according to the story she was telling now, she'd done it all herself. I was just some deadweight husband who'd been along for the ride, contributing nothing but taking everything. The paperwork said otherwise. Every major business decision had required both our signatures. Every loan application listed both our incomes. Every tax return showed joint filing with shared business income. Hell, I was technically listed as co-owner and chief marketing officer on the official business registration. This is some serious ammunition, Marcus said, studying a particularly damaging contract that clearly showed my financial investment in the business. What are you going to do with it? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Because having evidence is one thing. Knowing what to do with it is something else entirely. I could march into Miranda's boutique and wave these papers around like some kind of wronged businessman demanding justice. I could post my own social media takedown, complete with photographic evidence of every financial contribution I'd made to our life together. I could even show up at one of her yoga classes and make a scene that would give her followers something really interesting to talk about. But all of those options felt small, reactive. like I'd be playing her game instead of starting my own. That's when I remembered Eleanor Voss. Eleanor and I had worked together about 5 years ago when her previous law firm needed some marketing consultation. She was the kind of lawyer who made other lawyers nervous, brilliant, ruthless, and completely immune to the sob stories that made most people fold like cheap lawn chairs. She'd left her old firm to start her own practice, specializing in high-stakes divorce cases and business disputes. Her reputation was legendary. If you wanted someone destroyed legally and financially, Eleanor was your girl. More importantly, she'd never liked Miranda. During the few times they'd met at business functions, Eleanor had made it clear she thought my wife was what she called professionally charming, which was lawyer speak for fake as a $3 bill. I found Eleanor's number in my contacts and stared at it for about 10 minutes, my thumb hovering over the call button. Because calling Eleanor meant this was real. It meant I was done hoping Miranda would come to her senses and apologize. It meant I was ready to burn down everything we'd built together if that's what it took to get justice. The phone rang 3 times before Eleanor's voice cut through with its usual efficiency. Adrian Cross. I was wondering when you'd call. You heard about what happened? Honey, everyone's heard about what happened. Your wife turned you into a social media meme. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I looked around Marcus's apartment, at the futon that had been my bed for 3 weeks, at the boxes of belongings that represented the wreckage of my former life, at the evidence spread across the table that proved everything Lila had said was a lie. I want to take back what's mine, I said. Eleanor's laugh was sharp and satisfied. Good. Let's set up a meeting. Bring everything you've got, and we'll see just how much your dear wife is going to regret throwing you out of that car. How much is this going to cost me? Don't worry about my fee, Eleanor said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Something tells me this case is going to pay for itself. Besides, I've been waiting for an excuse to take down someone like Miranda for years. Consider this a professional pleasure. I hung up and looked at Marcus, who'd been listening to the entire conversation with growing amusement. Feel better? He asked. Not yet, I said, starting to gather up the papers. But I'm about to. Because here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you one hell of an advantage when you finally decide to show people what you're really capable of. Miranda and Lila thought they'd gotten rid of dead weight. They were about to learn they'd actually just poked a sleeping bear. You know that moment in horror movies when the monster that everyone thought was dead suddenly opens its eyes? That's exactly what I felt like when Marcus shook me awake at 9 in the morning with the kind of grin that meant trouble was about to walk through our front door. Guess who's here to see you? He said, and I could hear voices in the living room. One familiar, one unfortunately more familiar. I'd been expecting this visit for exactly 3 weeks and 1 day. Not because I'm psychic, but because I know Miranda better than she knows herself. She operates on a very predictable cycle: impulse, justification, doubt, panic, damage control. 3 weeks was about how long it took for her to work through the first 4 stages and realize that maybe, just maybe, throwing your husband out of a moving car might have legal consequences. I pulled on yesterday's jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better decades, ran my fingers through my hair to achieve that I definitely haven't been plotting your downfall look, and walked into the living room like I was heading to my own execution. There she was, standing in Marcus's bachelor pad like a queen surveying a peasant village she was considering having burned down. Miranda looked exactly like she always did when she was trying to intimidate someone into submission. Perfectly styled hair that probably cost more than most people's car payments, makeup applied with the precision of a Renaissance painter, and an outfit that screamed, I have more money than you, and I'm not afraid to use it. She was wearing this cream-colored blazer over dark jeans and boots that probably cost more than my current monthly budget, accessorized with enough jewelry to fund a small country's infrastructure program. The whole ensemble was designed to remind me of everything I'd supposedly lost when she'd kicked me to the curb. And standing slightly behind her, like a loyal attacked dog waiting for the command to strike, was darling little Lila. Sweet, innocent Lila, who dressed for the occasion in what I could only describe as young professional sociopath chic. A black dress that probably came from her mother's boutique, paired with an expression that suggested she was already planning my funeral. Adrian, Miranda said, and her voice had that particular tone she used when she was trying to sound reasonable while being completely unreasonable. I think it's time we talked. Marcus, bless his tactical soul, had positioned himself near the kitchen counter where he could watch the whole show while pretending to make coffee. He caught my eye and raised an eyebrow that clearly said, "You want me to throw them out, or are you handling this yourself?" I gave him the tiniest shake of my head. I'd been waiting for this moment for 3 weeks. No way was I missing the show. "Sure," I said, settling into the chair across from the couch where Miranda had made herself comfortable. "Let's talk. What's on your mind?" Miranda smoothed her hands over her jeans like she was preparing for a business presentation. "I think you've had enough time to reflect on what happened, to think about your behavior, and maybe come to some realizations about why things went so wrong between us." Reflect on my behavior. That was rich. I'd spent 3 weeks reflecting. All right. Reflecting on 6 years of marriage to a woman who'd apparently been keeping a mental scoreboard of every perceived slight and disappointment, just waiting for an excuse to cash them all in at once. "I've definitely been doing some reflecting," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as Switzerland. "What kind of realizations were you hoping I'd come to?" "Well," Miranda said, glancing at Lila for support, "I think you need to acknowledge that you crossed some lines. That maybe you took advantage of my generosity and lost sight of what was appropriate in our relationship. Lost sight of what was appropriate. Coming from the woman who'd physically assaulted me and then bragged about it online, that was absolutely hilarious. And what lines would those be exactly?" I asked. Lila leaned forward like she'd been waiting for her cue to join the conversation. "The financial ones, obviously. The way you used Mom's success for your own benefit without contributing anything real in return. I had to give her credit. She delivered that line with the confidence of someone who actually believed it. Either she was a better actress than I'd given her credit for, or she'd actually convinced herself that her lie was the truth. Both options were equally terrifying." "Interesting theory," I said. "Anything else?" Miranda took a deep breath like she was about to deliver a particularly difficult diagnosis. "Look, Adrian, I know this has been hard on you. Being asked to leave was abrupt. But I think if you're honest with yourself, you'll admit that things hadn't been working between us for a while." Things hadn't been working. That was one way to describe discovering that your wife's daughter had been systematically poisoning her against you while you were busy trying to build a family. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "I think," Miranda said, her voice taking on that sweet, reasonable tone that had once made me fall in love with her and now made my skin crawl, "that if you're willing to apologize for your behavior and acknowledge the mistakes you made, we might be able to work something out. Maybe you could come home, and we could try to rebuild our relationship on a more honest foundation." Come home. Like she was offering me some kind of generous gift instead of proposing that I crawl back to the scene of my humiliation and pretend nothing had happened. "And what would this honest foundation look like?" I asked. Lila jumped in before Miranda could answer. "It would mean respecting boundaries, not taking advantage of Mom's kindness. Maybe getting your own place eventually, instead of just assuming you're entitled to live in our house. Our house, not the house Miranda and I had bought together with my money. Our house, like I'd been nothing more than a long-term house guest who'd overstayed his welcome." I looked at Miranda to see if she was going to correct her daughter's little power play, but she just sat there nodding like Lila had said something profound instead of something completely insane. That's when I realized that this wasn't really an apology mission at all. This was a negotiation from a position of assumed strength. They weren't here because they missed me or because they'd realized they'd made a mistake. They were here because somewhere in the back of Miranda's mind, a little voice was whispering that maybe she'd gone too far. Maybe throwing her husband out of a car and broadcasting it to the world hadn't been her smartest move. But instead of admitting that, instead of acknowledging that she'd screwed up, she was trying to reframe the whole situation as me needing to earn my way back into her good graces. It was actually kind of beautiful, in a completely psychotic way. "Well," I said, standing up and walking over to the kitchen counter where I'd left my coffee, "that's certainly an interesting offer. So you'll consider it?" Miranda asked, and for just a second, I caught a glimpse of uncertainty in her eyes. Like maybe she wasn't as confident about her position as she was pretending to be. I took a long sip of coffee, savoring the moment. Because this was it. The moment I'd been planning for 3 weeks. The moment when I stopped being the victim and started being the guy who fights back. I reached into the manila envelope I'd left on the counter and pulled out a neat stack of papers, bound with one of those little black clips that lawyers love so much. Actually, I said, walking back over and holding out the envelope to Miranda. I've got a counteroffer for you. She took the envelope with the kind of careful motion people use when they're not sure if they're being handed a gift or a bomb. What is this? She asked. Divorce papers, I said, and the words felt like freedom sliding off my tongue. I did reflect, Miranda. I reflected on 6 years of marriage to someone who was willing to believe the worst about me without even asking for my side of the story. I reflected on being married to someone who thought physical violence was an appropriate response to a family disagreement. And you know what conclusion I came to? Miranda's face had gone very pale, and she was staring at the papers like they might spontaneously combust. I'm done, I said. I'm done being your convenient scapegoat. I'm done pretending your daughter's toxicity is something I need to tolerate. And I'm definitely done being married to someone who thinks sorry means demanding that I apologize to her. The silence in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife and served it for dinner. Chapter 6, The Daughter's Explosion. You know that moment in a movie when the villain finally realizes the hero isn't going to roll over and die? That split second when their smug confidence cracks, and you can see the panic creeping in around the edges? That's exactly what was happening on Miranda's face as she stared at those divorce papers like they were written in ancient hieroglyphics. But before she could even process what she was holding, her darling daughter decided to remind everyone why she was the real mastermind behind this whole disaster. What the hell is this supposed to be? Lila shrieked, and I mean shrieked. The sound that came out of her mouth was somewhere between a fire alarm and a dying cat, pitched at exactly the frequency designed to shatter both glass and eardrums. She'd been lurking in the hallway, because of course she had, probably listening to every word and getting more pissed off by the second that her carefully orchestrated reunion wasn't going according to plan. Now she came storming into the living room like a tiny tornado of designer clothes and misplaced rage. You can't do this, she continued, her voice climbing to levels that probably had dogs howling 3 blocks away. You're nothing without her. You're absolutely nothing. I had to admire the commitment to her narrative, really. Even faced with legal documents that were about to turn her world upside down, Lila was still pushing the same tired script. Poor, helpless Adrian, who'd been living off mommy's generosity and now had the audacity to bite the hand that fed him. Marcus, who'd been watching this whole drama unfold with the fascination of someone observing a particularly violent nature documentary, actually started grinning. He'd never seen Lila lose her composure before. Hell, none of us had. The girl was usually ice-cold calculating, all fake smiles and strategic tears. But apparently, divorce papers were her kryptonite. Lila, calm down, Miranda said, though she looked about as calm as someone defusing a bomb while riding a roller coaster. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking as she flipped through the papers, and I could see her brain working overtime trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to her master plan. No. Lila spun around to face her mother, and for the first time since I'd known her, the mask completely slipped. Gone was the sweet, innocent victim act. Gone was the concerned daughter just trying to protect her mom. What stood in my living room? Well, Marcus's living room was pure, undiluted entitlement wearing a designer dress. This is exactly what I warned you about, she continued, jabbing her finger at me like I was some kind of exotic disease. He's trying to take everything. He's trying to destroy our family. Our family. There it was again, that possessive little phrase that had been driving me crazy for 6 years. Not the family, or my mom's family, or even my family. Our family, like she and Miranda were some kind of exclusive club that I'd never really been invited to join. Actually, I said, settling back into my chair and enjoying the show, I'm not trying to take everything. I'm just taking what's legally mine. There's a difference. You have no right to anything. Lila screamed, and now she was really getting warmed up. Her face was turning red, her carefully styled hair was coming undone, and she was gesticulating wildly like she was conducting an orchestra of chaos. You married her for her money, and now you're trying to steal it in divorce court. That's when something truly beautiful happened. Miranda, who had been sitting there in stunned silence while her daughter threw her tantrum, suddenly looked up from the papers with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or confusion or even fear. It was realization. Lila, she said quietly, stop. But Lila was on a roll now. too deep in her rage to notice that she was digging her own grave with every word. He never loved you, Mom. He was just waiting for the right moment to cash in. And now he's found some sleazy lawyer to help him steal everything we've worked for. I couldn't help myself. What exactly did you work for, Lila? Your biggest achievement in the last year was getting your mother to pay for your spring break trip to Cabo. I protected her from you. Lila shot back, and there it was, the truth, naked and ugly and absolutely damning. I saw through your act from day one. I knew what you really were. The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Because what Lila had just admitted, in her uncontrolled fury, was that she'd been plotting against me from the very beginning. Not protecting her mother from some recent betrayal, not responding to suspicious behavior she'd suddenly noticed. She'd been actively working to destroy my marriage from day one. Miranda was staring at her daughter like she'd never seen her before. And maybe she hadn't, really. Maybe she'd been so blinded by maternal love and the desire to keep her daughter happy that she'd never noticed what a manipulative little sociopath she'd raised. You planned this, Miranda said slowly, and her voice was so quiet it was barely audible. From the beginning. You never gave him a chance. Of course I never gave him a chance. Lila exploded, too far gone to realize she was confessing to years of psychological warfare. Why would I? He was just some random guy who thought he could waltz into our lives and take over. You were fine before he showed up. We were fine. And there it was, the real motive, laid bare in all its twisted glory. This wasn't about protecting her mother or preventing financial abuse or any of the noble reasons she'd been selling. This was about a spoiled 20-year-old who couldn't handle sharing mommy's attention and had spent 6 years systematically destroying any chance of happiness her mother might have found. Marcus was openly staring now, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. I think even he was impressed by the sheer scope of Lila's manipulation and the spectacular way it was all falling apart. Lila, Miranda said, and now her voice was getting stronger, more certain. You lied to me. About the money, about Adrian stealing, about everything. I didn't lie, Lila insisted, but her voice was getting shrill and desperate. I was protecting you. You're too trusting, too naive. You needed someone to look out for your interests. By destroying my marriage. It wasn't a real marriage anyway. Lila shot back, and I swear I could see the exact moment when she realized she'd gone too far. Her face went pale, her mouth snapped shut, and she looked around the room like she was suddenly aware that everyone was staring at her with varying degrees of horror and disgust. Miranda stood up slowly, those divorce papers still clutched in her hands. And for the first time in 6 years, she looked at her daughter the way she should have been looking at her all along, like someone who'd just discovered a snake in her bed. Get out, she said quietly. Mom, get out of here, Lila. Right now? Before I say something we'll both regret. You can't be serious, Lila said, but her voice had lost all its fire. Now she just sounded like what she really was. A scared kid who just realized her game was over and she was about to face the consequences. I'm completely serious, Miranda said, and the steel in her voice was something I'd only heard a few times in our marriage, usually when she was dealing with difficult customers or pushy suppliers. You've destroyed enough. Get out. Lila looked around the room one more time, maybe hoping someone would come to her rescue or tell her this was all just a misunderstanding. But Marcus was watching her with open contempt. I was watching her with something that might have been pity if I wasn't still so angry. And her mother was watching her with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than any insult. Fine, Lila said, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. But don't come crying to me when he takes everything and leaves you with nothing. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows, and then it was just me, Miranda, and the wreckage of 6 years of lies. You know what's better than revenge? Watching your enemies destroy themselves while you sit back and eat popcorn. And boy, did Miranda and Lila put on a show that would have made Shakespeare weep with envy. It started about 3 days after our first court session, when Marcus came home from his morning run with the kind of grin that meant he'd just witnessed something spectacular. He found me in the kitchen, going through more legal documents Eleanor had sent over, evidence for round 2 of our legal smackdown. Dude, he said, still slightly out of breath from his 5-mile route through the neighborhood. You're not gonna believe what I just heard coming from your wife's house. Ex-wife. I corrected automatically, though the papers weren't final yet. Whatever. Point is, they're going at each other like cats in a blender. I could hear them screaming from 2 blocks away. This was interesting news, but not entirely surprising. See, here's the thing about toxic family dynamics. They only work when everyone's united against a common enemy. Remove that enemy, and suddenly all that poison has nowhere to go except inward. Miranda and Lila had spent 6 years bonding over their shared mission to keep me in my place. Now that I was gone and fighting back, they didn't have anything left to bond over except mutual blame. What were they fighting about? I asked, trying to sound casual while internally doing a victory dance. From what I could make out, Lila was yelling something about how this was all Miranda's fault for being weak and stupid, and Miranda was screaming back about Lila ruining her life. Marcus grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and shook his head. It was like listening to a very expensive episode of Jerry Springer. Over the next few days, the reports kept coming in. Because that's the thing about living in a nice neighborhood. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and gossip travels faster than a California wildfire. Janet, our mail carrier, mentioned that she'd had to wait 5 minutes for the shouting to die down before she could safely approach Miranda's front door. The FedEx guy told Marcus he'd actually turned around and left a package at the depot because the screaming coming from inside the house made him think someone was being murdered. Even Mrs. Patterson, the 70-year-old lady who lived next door to Miranda and was usually deaf as a post, started complaining about the noise. But the real intelligence came from Sarah, Miranda's former best friend from book club. I ran into her at the grocery store about a week after the court hearing, and let me tell you, she was practically bursting with information she was dying to share. "Adrian," she said, cornering me in the frozen food aisle like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. "I heard about the divorce. How are you holding up?" Now, Sarah had been Team Miranda since day one of our separation. She'd been one of the people cheerfully commenting on Miranda's social media posts about cutting dead weight and knowing your worth. But apparently, recent developments had caused her to reconsider her loyalties. "I'm doing fine, Sarah," I said, trying to extract myself from the conversation before it turned into a gossip session that would fuel the neighborhood rumor mill for months. "Well, I just want you to know that I never believed those things Lila was saying about you," she said, which was interesting since she'd been publicly supporting Miranda's version of events just 2 weeks ago. "I always thought there was more to the story." "That's very kind of you to say. And honestly," Sarah continued, lowering her voice like we were discussing state secrets, "I think Miranda is finally starting to see what Lila really is. The things that girl has been saying to her mother. It's just awful. This was where I should have politely excused myself and walked away. This was where I should have taken the high road and refused to engage in gossip about my estranged wife and her toxic daughter. This was where I should have been a better person. Instead, I found myself asking, what kind of things?" Sarah's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Well, according to Lisa, who heard it from her daughter who works at the boutique, Lila showed up there last week screaming at Miranda in front of customers. Called her a pathetic old woman who was too stupid to see that you were playing her all along. Wow, even by Lila's standards, that was impressively vicious. But here's the really crazy part," Sarah continued, clearly enjoying herself. "Lila told Miranda that she should be grateful for everything she did to protect her from you. Said Miranda was weak and naive and would have lost everything if Lila hadn't stepped in to save her. I had to give Lila credit for consistency, if not for sanity. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence that she destroyed her mother's marriage for no good reason, she was still doubling down on her savior complex. And what did Miranda say to that? From what Lisa heard, Miranda finally lost it. Started yelling about how Lila had lied to her, how she'd ruined the best relationship she'd ever had, how she'd turned her into the kind of person who throws her husband out of a car. Sarah shook her head in amazement. Apparently, she kicked Lila out of the store and told her not to come back. This was getting better and better. Not only were they fighting, but Miranda was finally starting to understand the scope of what her daughter had done. It was like watching someone wake up from a 6-year coma and realize their entire life had been a lie. But Sarah wasn't done with her intelligence briefing. "And then," she said, leaning in closer, "yesterday, Lila showed up at Miranda's house with some guy she's been dating. You know, that loser with the motorcycle who thinks he's in a boy band? Anyway, she demanded that Miranda give her money for a deposit on an apartment, since Miranda had ruined her living situation by choosing you over her own daughter. Let me guess, I said. Miranda said no. Miranda said hell no. And then Lila started screaming about how Miranda owed her for all the years she'd spent protecting her, how she'd sacrificed her own happiness to keep you from taking advantage of Miranda's kindness. Sarah was clearly relishing every detail. So Miranda told her that the only person who'd been taking advantage of anyone was Lila herself. And then what happened? From what Mrs. Patterson told me, Lila threw something, maybe a vase, and it shattered against the wall. Then she stormed out yelling that Miranda would regret choosing a lying thief over her own flesh and blood. I tried to process this information with appropriate solemnity, but inside I was doing backflips. Because this was exactly what I'd hoped would happen, but better. I'd figured that removing myself from the equation would cause some tension between Miranda and Lila, but I hadn't dared to hope for this level of spectacular implosion. Marcus was right when he got home that evening. I was living rent-free in their heads, and they were tearing each other apart trying to figure out who was to blame for losing me. The best part, Marcus said, settling into his favorite chair with a beer, is that you're not even doing anything. You're just sitting here, going through legal documents and living your life, while they're over there setting their own house on fire. He was right. This wasn't some elaborate revenge scheme I'd orchestrated. This was just the natural consequence of two toxic people being forced to confront the reality of what they'd done without having me around to blame for everything that went wrong in their lives. You think it'll get worse? I asked. Marcus laughed. Brother, this is just the beginning. Wait until the next court hearing when that judge rules in your favor. Wait until Miranda realizes she's about to lose half of everything she thought was hers. Wait until Lila figures out that Mommy isn't going to be able to fund her lifestyle anymore. He was right, of course. This was just the opening act. The real fireworks were still to come. You know that moment in boxing when one fighter lands the perfect punch, not the flashiest or the loudest, but the one that settles everything? That's exactly what the second court hearing felt like, except instead of boxing gloves, we were using legal documents, and instead of a 10 count, we had Judge Chen's gavel. The courtroom looked exactly the same as it had 3 weeks earlier, but the energy was completely different. Miranda sat at her table, looking like she'd aged about 5 years since our last appearance. Her perfect composure replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting a war on multiple fronts and losing every battle. Her lawyer, Pemberton, looked even worse. The cocky country club confidence had been replaced by the desperate energy of a man who knew he was about to watch his case get dismantled piece by piece. He kept shuffling through his papers like he might magically find some evidence that would save them. But we all knew the truth. They were screwed, and everyone in that courtroom could smell it. Eleanor, on the other hand, looked like a woman who'd already won and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. She'd traded her usual briefcase for what looked like a small library of documents, all meticulously organized and color-coded. Every piece of evidence we needed to destroy Miranda's claims was right there at her fingertips. But the real difference was the empty chair next to Miranda. Lila was once again nowhere to be seen, which told me everything I needed to know about how their relationship was going. The girl who'd started this whole mess by lying about my supposed theft couldn't even be bothered to show up and watch the consequences of her actions play out. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Chun, the bailiff announced, and we went through the familiar ritual of standing and sitting while Judge Chun settled into her throne of justice. This is the continued hearing in the matter of Cross versus Cross, she said, flipping through what looked like our entire case file. Mr. Pemberton, I trust you've had time to review the evidence presented in our last session? Pemberton stood up like a man walking to his own execution. Yes, Your Honor. The defense maintains that Mrs. Cross's business success was primarily due to her own efforts and vision, and that Mr. Cross's contributions were minimal at best. Judge Chun looked at him over her reading glasses with the expression of someone who'd just been told that gravity was optional. Mr. Pemberton, are you suggesting that bank records, business contracts, and sworn testimony are all somehow inaccurate? No, Your Honor, but we believe the context of these contributions has been misrepresented. I see. And what context would that be? This was where Pemberton made his fatal mistake. Instead of cutting his losses and trying to salvage what he could for his client, he decided to double down on stupid. Your Honor, while Mr. Cross may have made financial contributions to the business, Mrs. Cross was the creative force, the public face, and the primary decision-maker. Mr. Cross was essentially a silent partner who— Objection, Eleanor said, rising from her chair with the grace of a predator who'd just spotted wounded prey. Your Honor, Mr. Pemberton is testifying rather than presenting evidence. Sustained, Judge Chin said, and the look she gave Pemberton could have frozen hell over. Mr. Pemberton, do you have any new evidence to present, or are we going to continue with creative storytelling? That's when Eleanor stood up and delivered what can only be described as a legal masterpiece. Your Honor, if I may address the court's question about context. She walked over to the evidence table and picked up a thick folder. The plaintiff would like to present additional evidence that we believe provides the complete picture of Mr. Cross's role in the defendant's business success. Judge Chin gestured for her to proceed, and Eleanor opened that folder like she was revealing the crown jewels. This, Your Honor, is a complete audit of Miranda's boutique from its inception to the present day, conducted by a certified public accountant. She handed copies to the judge and to Pemberton, who looked like he was about to throw up. This audit shows that prior to Mr. Cross's involvement, the business was operating at a loss of approximately $30,000 per quarter. She let that number sink in for a moment before continuing. Within 6 months of Mr. Cross's investment and operational involvement, the business showed its first profit. Within 1 year, quarterly profits had increased to an average of $40,000. The current quarterly profit average is $65,000. I watched Miranda's face during this presentation, and it was like watching someone realize that their house had been built on quicksand. Because what Eleanor was laying out wasn't just my contribution to the business. It was proof that without me, there wouldn't be a business to fight over. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, this audit shows that Mr. Cross's marketing strategies directly resulted in a 340% increase in customer base. His inventory management system reduced overhead costs by 35%, and his supplier negotiations improved profit margins by an average of 22%. Pemberton tried to object, but Judge Chin waved him off like she was shooing away a particularly annoying fly. Your Honor, Eleanor said, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Cross wasn't just a contributor to this business. He was the architect of its success. Mrs. Cross provided the initial vision and continues to serve as the public face, but Mr. Cross transformed that vision into a profitable enterprise. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the financial breakdown. Based on Mr. Cross's initial investment, his ongoing contributions, and his role in the business's success, the plaintiff is seeking 50% of all business assets, 50% of all jointly acquired property, and recognition of his status as co-owner rather than employee. The silence in that courtroom was so complete you could have heard a mouse sneeze. Miranda was staring at the table in front of her like it might contain answers to questions she didn't even know how to ask. Pemberton was frantically scribbling notes that probably said things like, "We're screwed," and "update resume." Judge Chin spent what felt like an eternity reviewing the audit documents, occasionally looking up at Miranda with an expression that suggested she was seeing the case in an entirely new light. "Mrs. Cross," she finally said, "do you dispute the accuracy of this financial audit?" Miranda looked up like someone had just slapped her awake. "No, Your Honor. The numbers appear to be accurate. And do you dispute that Mr. Cross played a significant role in your business's financial success?" Another long pause. Another moment of visible internal struggle. "No, Your Honor. And do you dispute that you physically removed Mr. Cross from your vehicle and subsequently posted about it on social media?" This time Miranda didn't even hesitate. "No, Your Honor." Judge Chun leaned back in her chair and studied both parties like she was looking at two particularly disappointing children who'd forced her to sort out their mess. "Very well. Based on the evidence presented, the testimony given, and the financial audit provided, this court finds that Mr. Cross has demonstrated substantial contribution to the marital assets in question." She paused to flip through her notes. "The court hereby grants the dissolution of marriage and awards Mr. Cross 50% of all business assets, 50% of all jointly acquired property, and recognition as co-owner of Miranda's boutique. The gavel came down with the finality of a coffin lid closing. I felt like I should be celebrating, jumping up and down, maybe doing a victory dance right there in the courtroom. But honestly, all I felt was tired. Tired and relieved, and maybe a little sad that it had come to this. Miranda sat frozen in her chair, staring at nothing, while Pemberton gathered his papers with the efficiency of someone who wanted to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. In the gallery behind me, Marcus was probably fighting to keep from cheering out loud. But the real victory wasn't the money or the property or even the recognition. The real victory was walking out of that courtroom as a free man, no longer bound to someone who'd thrown me away like garbage and then expected me to be grateful for the experience. As we packed up our documents, Eleanor leaned over and whispered, "How does it feel to be vindicated?" "Like justice," I said. "It feels like justice." Outside the courthouse, Miranda caught up with us as we were walking to Eleanor's car. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like someone had let all the air out of her. "Adrian," she called, and I turned around to face the woman who'd been my wife for 6 years and my adversary for the last 2 months. "What, Miranda?" I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. About the car, about believing Lila, about all of it. Too little, too late, but I appreciated the gesture." "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't give me back 6 years of marriage to someone who was willing to believe the worst about me without even asking for my side of the story." She nodded like she understood, though I doubted she really did. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think I'm finally starting to see what Lila really is. What she's been doing to both of us." "Good," I said. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before letting a 20-year-old run your life." And with that, I walked away from Miranda Cross for the last time. You know what they don't tell you about winning? Sometimes it feels exactly like losing, except with better paperwork and a bigger bank account. 3 months after Judge Chen's gavel had officially ended my marriage and started my new life, I was standing on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at a city that suddenly felt full of possibilities instead of problems. The apartment was a complete 180 from the house I'd shared with Miranda. No marble countertops or designer fixtures. No walk-in closets big enough to house a small family. Just clean lines, lots of windows, and the kind of minimalist aesthetic that screams, bachelor who's got his shit together. It was exactly what I needed, a fresh start that didn't come with 6 years of emotional baggage built into the walls. Marcus had helped me move in, naturally. The guy had become my unofficial life coach, marriage counselor, and reality check all rolled into one. He'd taken one look at my new place and nodded approvingly. "This," he'd said, cracking open a beer and settling into my new leather couch, "this is what winning looks like." He wasn't wrong. The settlement had been even better than Eleanor had predicted. 50% of the business assets, 50% of the house proceeds when Miranda was forced to sell it, and a nice chunk of the investment portfolio we'd built together. Turns out, when you actually contribute to a marriage instead of just taking up space, the courts tend to notice. But the real satisfaction came from the follow-up reports I kept getting about Miranda and Lila's ongoing implosion. Because apparently, when you remove the common enemy that's been holding your toxic family dynamic together, things get very ugly very quickly. Sarah from the book club had become my unofficial intelligence source, though I suspected she was getting as much entertainment out of the gossip as I was. She'd stopped by the previous week with updates that were better than any reality TV show. "So get this," she'd said, settling into my kitchen with coffee and the latest neighborhood drama. "Miranda had to put the house on the market last month. This wasn't news to me. I'd been tracking the sale as part of the settlement agreement. But Sarah had details that went beyond the legal paperwork. Apparently, Lila showed up the day before the real estate photos were taken and threw an absolute fit. Started screaming about how this was her childhood home and Miranda had no right to sell it just to pay Adrian his blood money. Blood money. I had to admire Lila's commitment to making me the villain in her story, even when faced with overwhelming evidence that she destroyed her mother's life for no good reason. And then what happened? Miranda finally grew a spine and told her that if she wanted to keep the house, she was welcome to come up with $500,000 to buy out your share. Sarah laughed like this was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. Lila said Miranda should take out another mortgage, and Miranda told her that her credit was already maxed out from trying to keep the business afloat during the divorce proceedings. That was interesting news. I'd wondered how Miranda was handling the financial pressure of losing half her assets while trying to maintain her lifestyle. Apparently, not well. But here's the really good part, Sarah continued. Lila demanded that Miranda give her money to put down on her own apartment, since she was being forced out of her family home. When Miranda said she couldn't afford it, Lila accused her of choosing you over her own daughter. And Miranda told her that she'd already chosen you over her daughter 6 years ago when she married you. And the only reason that choice had been a mistake was because Lila had spent 6 years systematically sabotaging it. I had to give Miranda credit for finally connecting the dots, even if it was about 3 months too late to save our marriage. The business reports were even better. According to Eleanor's contacts in the financial community, Miranda's boutique was struggling without my operational expertise. Inventory was piling up, customer complaints were increasing, and the marketing budget was being wasted on flashy campaigns that looked good but didn't actually drive sales. She's learning the hard way that running a business involves more than just being the pretty face in the advertising. Eleanor had told me during our final meeting. Your ex-wife is discovering that all those systems you put in place weren't just suggestions. They were the foundation that kept everything running smoothly. The irony was delicious. Miranda had spent years taking credit for the business's success while minimizing my contributions. Now she was finding out exactly how much she'd been taking for granted. But the news that really made my day came from Marcus, who'd run into Lila at a coffee shop downtown. She'd apparently been working as a barista for the past month, which was probably the first real job she'd ever had in her life. She looked like hell, Marcus had reported with obvious satisfaction. Hair in a messy bun, coffee stains on her uniform, and the kind of dead-eyed expression you get from dealing with entitled customers all day. Did she see you? Oh yeah, made eye contact and everything. I ordered a large coffee, extra hot, and told her to have a wonderful day. Marcus grinned like a man who'd just won the lottery. She looked like she wanted to spit in my cup, but apparently even she's not stupid enough to mess with customers when she needs the job. The mental image of Princess Lila taking orders from random strangers and cleaning up spilled milk was almost too perfect to believe. Justice had a sense of humor after all. But the real moment of closure came 2 weeks later, when I was leaving my new office. Yeah, I'd started my own consulting business, because apparently getting screwed over by your wife is excellent motivation for professional independence. I was walking to my car when I heard a familiar voice calling my name. I turned around, and there was Lila, looking nothing like the confident young woman who'd destroyed my marriage for months earlier. She was thinner, tired-looking, and dressed in clothes that actually looked like they came from a normal store instead of her mother's boutique. Adrian, she said, and her voice had none of its usual edge. Can we talk? I can't imagine what we'd have to talk about, I said, because honestly, I couldn't. The girl had made it clear that she considered me the enemy from day one. What could she possibly want to discuss now? I wanted to apologize. For what I said about you. For what I did to you and Mom. This was unexpected. Lila admitting she was wrong was like witnessing a solar eclipse. Rare, memorable, and probably a sign that something fundamental had shifted in the universe. Okay, I said. I'm listening. I was jealous, she said, and the words came out like they physically hurt to say. Mom was so happy with you, and I felt like I was losing her. So I convinced myself that you were the problem, and I did everything I could to get rid of you, including lying about me stealing from her. Including that. Lila looked down at her hands like they contained the secrets of the universe. I told myself I was protecting her, but really I was just selfish. I wanted her all to myself. It was the first honest thing I'd ever heard come out of her mouth, and it was about 4 months too late to matter. Well, I said, you got what you wanted. You have her all to yourself now. No, I don't. Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. She won't even talk to me anymore. She blames me for ruining her marriage, for destroying her business, for everything that's gone wrong in her life. And there it was, the final piece of poetic justice. Lila had gotten exactly what she'd thought she wanted, only to discover that destroying other people's happiness doesn't actually make you happy. It just makes you the kind of person who destroys other people's happiness. I'm sorry that happened, I said, and I actually meant it. Not because I felt bad for Lila. She'd made her bed and now she was lying in it. But because the whole situation was just wasteful. 6 years of marriage, a successful business partnership, and a family dynamic that could have worked if everyone had just been honest about what they wanted. Do you think? Lila started, then stopped herself. Never mind. What? Do you think you could ever forgive me? For what I did? I thought about that for a long moment. Forgiveness is a tricky thing. It's not about pretending someone didn't hurt you, and it's not about letting them off the hook for the consequences of their actions. It's about choosing not to carry their poison around inside you anymore. I already have, I said. But that doesn't mean I trust you, and it doesn't mean I want you in my life. Some things break in ways that can't be fixed. Lila nodded like she understood, though I suspected she was hoping for a different answer. For what it's worth, she said, you were good for her. For Mom. She was happier with you than I'd ever seen her. I know, I said. That's what makes this whole thing so pointless. And with that, I walked away from Lila Cross for the last time. That night, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine, looking out at the city lights and thinking about second chances. Not the kind where you go back and try to fix what's broken, but the kind where you take what you've learned and build something better. I'd gotten my revenge, all right. Not by screaming or plotting or trying to hurt Miranda and Lila the way they'd hurt me. I'd gotten my revenge by refusing to let their toxicity define my future. I'd gotten my revenge by building a life that was better than anything I could have had with them. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. My wife claimed she was on a business trip, but she was vacationing with my brother and parents. I found out through her sister's secret social media account. When I checked my airline account, I discovered they used my hard-earned miles. I said nothing and left the house. At the airport, my wife, sister, and parents were furious. You know how some people say hindsight is 20/20? Well, that's complete bullshit. Hindsight is more like looking through a funhouse mirror after someone smashed it with a sledgehammer. Everything's distorted, sharp-edged, and guaranteed to cut you if you get too close. But hell, here I am anyway, picking through the glass. My name's Julian Carter, and up until about 6 months ago, I thought I had this whole life thing figured out. Operations director at Meridian Logistics in Stanford. Yeah, I'm one of those guys who gets a hard-on from spreadsheets and delivery schedules. Sue me. I live by numbers because numbers don't lie. People? Well, that's a different story entirely, but we'll get to that clusterfuck soon enough. Our house in Greenwich was the kind of place you'd see in those real estate porn magazines that rich housewives flip through while waiting for their Botox appointments. You know the type, all clean lines, perfectly staged fruit bowls, and that ridiculous amount of natural light that makes everything look like it's been blessed by God himself. Every Sunday morning, like clockwork, that golden light would stream through our dining room windows and hit the mahogany table just right, turning our breakfast setup into something that belonged on a Hallmark card. I had my routine down to a science. Wake up at 7:15, not 7, not 7:30, but 7:15 because that gave me exactly enough time to shower, throw on my weekend uniform of khakis and a polo, and get the coffee brewing before Lydia made her grand entrance. She always came downstairs at exactly 8:20, hair perfectly tousled in that way that probably took her 45 minutes to achieve, wearing one of those flowy sundresses that cost more than most people's car payments. "Morning, babe," she'd say, floating into the kitchen like some kind of domestic goddess, and I'd hand her that first cup of coffee, cream, no sugar, in the blue ceramic mug she got from that overpriced boutique in Soho. She'd smile, that $1 million smile that had hooked me 6 years ago at my buddy's wedding. And for those first few minutes of every Sunday, the world felt solid. Predictable. Mine. We'd sit at that perfectly lit table, her scrolling through Instagram while I read the Wall Street Journal on my iPad, and everything would seem absolutely fucking normal. She'd show me pictures of her friends' weekend adventures. Brunches in the Hamptons, charity galas in Manhattan, couples trips to Napa that made my quarterly reports to corporate look like vacation slides. "We should do something like this," she'd say, and I'd nod and make mental notes about booking something similar, because that's what good husbands do, right? They keep their wives happy and their Instagram feeds looking enviable. The Sunday ritual extended beyond our kitchen, of course. There was church, St. Mary's Episcopal, where we had what I now realize was probably the most expensive pew rental in Connecticut. Lydia loved being seen there, loved the way other wives would compliment her outfits and ask where she got her hair done. Me? I went through the motions, stood when everyone stood, sang when everyone sang, and try not to think about how much the building fund donations were costing me every month. Then there were the dinners with my parents, Harold and Miriam Carter, every other Sunday without fail. My old man's a retired insurance executive who still wears three-piece suits to casual family gatherings, and my mother's one of those women who's turned hospitality into an Olympic sport. Their house in Darien was like a museum of middle-class success. Everything perfectly preserved, nothing out of place. Conversations that followed the same predictable script week after week. How's business, son? Good, Dad. The Q3 numbers came in strong. And Lydia, dear, you look lovely as always. Oh, Miriam, you're too kind. I love what you've done with the dining room. Rinse, repeat, pass the fucking potatoes. Occasionally, Lydia's younger sister Brielle would grace us with her presence, though grace might be too generous a word. Brielle was 28 going on 16, one of those social media influencers who somehow made a living posting pictures of her lunch and giving unsolicited life advice to her 50,000 followers. She worked for some digital marketing agency in the city, which basically meant she got paid to be professionally vapid on various platforms. Don't get me wrong, I didn't hate Brielle. She was harmless enough, in that annoying little sister kind of way. Always glued to her phone, always looking for the perfect angle, always turning every family gathering into an impromptu photo shoot. Can we get a group shot by the window? The lighting is amazing, she'd chirp, and we'd all dutifully arrange ourselves like mannequins while she took 47 nearly identical pictures. And that's the thing that really gets me now, looking back through those funhouse mirror shards. We actually looked good together. Really good. Like, magazine spread good. The successful businessman and his beautiful wife, surrounded by loving family, living the American fucking dream in all its wasp-y glory. Our Instagram feed was a carefully curated highlight reel of weekend trips to the Cape, anniversary dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, holiday parties where everyone was attractive and successful, and absolutely no one ever talked about anything real. Brielle made sure of that. She was our unofficial family photographer, always ready with her phone, always knowing exactly how to arrange us for maximum visual impact. Julian turned slightly left. Lydia, tilt your chin up just a tiny bit. Perfect. This is going to get so many likes. And it did. Every post, every story, every carefully crafted moment of our supposedly perfect life got hundreds of hearts and fire emojis and comments from people telling us how lucky we were, how beautiful we looked, how they wanted what we had. The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife, isn't it? All those people envying our picture-perfect existence while I'm standing there like a fucking moron, completely oblivious to the fact that I was living in a house of cards built on quicksand during an earthquake. But that's the thing about lies. The good ones, the really insidious ones, they don't announce themselves with dramatic music and flashing neon signs. They slip into your life wearing the face of everything you think you want, and they make themselves so comfortable that you start to believe they belong there. They become your normal, your routine, your Sunday morning ritual of coffee and smiles and perfectly filtered photographs. I used to think Sundays meant peace. I used to think consistency was the same thing as happiness. I used to think that if something looked right from the outside, it probably was right on the inside too. I used to think a lot of stupid shit, actually, but Sunday mornings were the worst because that's when I felt most secure in my delusions. The light would fall across our dining table in exactly the same warm way every week. Lydia would smile like everything was normal, and I'd sit there in my khakis and polo thinking I was the luckiest bastard in Connecticut. I had no idea that while I was busy scheduling my life down to the minute, other people were scheduling theirs around mine. I had no idea that my perfectly curated existence was actually just the set piece for someone else's drama. I learned too late that pictures tell stories. All right, just not the ones you think you're telling. They tell stories about who's missing from the frame, about what happened in the 60 seconds before the shutter clicked, about the conversations that got cut short when someone said, "Wait, let me get my phone." But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, in this moment I'm remembering, I'm still the guy who thinks Sunday mornings are about peace and coffee and the comfortable weight of routine. I'm still Julian Carter, operations director, devoted husband, dutiful son, the man with the plan who's got everything under control. What a fucking joke that turned out to be. You ever notice how the biggest lies always start with the smallest details? Like how someone who's about to screw you over will suddenly become really interested in making sure their story has all the right props and background music? Yeah, well, welcome to my crash course in Advanced Bullshit Detection 101, taught by the people I trusted most. It was a Tuesday morning in October, one of those crisp Connecticut days where the leaves are just starting to turn and every basic white girl in Greenwich is posting pumpkin spice latte photos like she's discovered fire. I was sitting at our kitchen island, working my way through quarterly shipping reports and trying to figure out why our Newark distribution center was hemorrhaging money, when Lydia came bouncing down the stairs like she'd just won the fucking lottery. Now, Lydia's not a bouncer by nature. She's more of a glider. You know, one of those women who moves through life like she's perpetually walking down a runway, all smooth grace and calculated elegance. So when she came actually bouncing, down those stairs at 7:30 in the morning with her hair still messy and wearing nothing but one of my old Yale t-shirts, my first thought wasn't, how delightful. It was more along the lines of, what the hell is happening here? Julian, baby, you're not going to believe this. She was practically vibrating with excitement, waving her iPhone around like it contained the secrets of the universe. I just got the most amazing opportunity. I looked up from my laptop, already feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach. You know, the one that shows up whenever someone starts a conversation with, "You're not going to believe this," because, spoiler alert, you're usually not going to want to believe it either. What kind of opportunity? I asked, closing the laptop because I could already tell this was going to require my full attention. A client. Well, a potential client. Wants to fly me out to Honolulu for a consultation. Like, immediately. Isn't that incredible? She shoved the phone in my face, showing me what looked like a legitimate business email with all the right logos and letterheads. They're launching this new luxury resort, and they specifically requested me after seeing my portfolio. They want to discuss a full branding package. Here's the thing about being married to someone for 6 years. You learn to read their tells. And Lydia had more tells than a poker player with Parkinson's. When she was genuinely excited about work, she'd start talking faster and gesturing with her hands. When she was nervous, she'd fidget with her wedding ring. When she was lying, she'd over-explain everything and make way too much eye contact, like she was trying to hypnotize me into believing her bullshit. Guess which category this fell into? That's great, babe, I said slowly. But don't you usually have more lead time for these kinds of things? I mean, flying to Hawaii for a consultation seems like something you'd plan more than. I glanced at the timestamp on the email, 12 hours in advance. I know, right? That's what makes it so exciting. They had a last-minute opening, and apparently their first choice fell through. It's like fate. She was practically glowing now, and I have to admit, part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to be the supportive husband who got excited about his wife's career opportunities, even if they did involve flying halfway across the Pacific on less than a day's notice. But here's what didn't make sense. Lydia worked for a boutique branding firm in White Plains that specialized in local businesses, restaurants, med spas, the occasional tech startup. Their biggest client was a chain of yoga studios in Westchester. They weren't the kind of agency that luxury Hawaiian resorts just happened to stumble across while browsing the internet for marketing talent. Who's the client? I asked. Kealani Resort Group, she said without missing a beat. They're developing this incredible property on the North Shore. Ultra-luxury, eco-friendly, targeting high-net-worth individuals who want an authentic Hawaiian experience. I nodded like this made perfect sense, while my brain started running through all the reasons it absolutely didn't. But what was I going to do? Interrogate my wife like she was trying to embezzle company funds? Tell her I didn't trust her judgment? Demand to see her browser history? When do you leave? I asked instead. Tonight. Can you believe it? I need to pack and get to JFK by 6 for an 8 o'clock flight. She was already heading toward the stairs, then stopped and spun around. You don't mind, do you? I know it's sudden, but this could be huge for my career. Like, career-defining huge. And there it was, the guilt trip disguised as consideration. The implication that if I had any objections to my wife flying to paradise on 12 hours' notice, I was obviously a controlling asshole who didn't support her professional ambitions. Of course I don't mind. I lied, because that's what you do when you're married. You swallow your instincts and trust the person you promised to love and honor and all that other shit that sounds so much easier in theory than in practice. Go for it. She beamed at me like I'd just told her she won the Nobel Prize for Marketing Excellence, kissed me on the forehead, and disappeared upstairs to pack. And that's when the real show began. Now, Lydia's normally a meticulous packer. She'll spend an hour debating between two nearly identical black blazers and create detailed outfits for every possible scenario, complete with backup accessories and weather contingencies. She travels with enough skincare products to stock a Sephora and at least 3 pairs of shoes for every day she's planning to be gone. But that morning she threw clothes into a suitcase like the house was on fire. I could hear her upstairs, opening and slamming drawers, muttering to herself, and generally creating the kind of chaos that usually preceded family emergencies or natural disasters. Need any help? I called up the stairs. No, I'm good. Almost done. Almost done turned into an hour and a half of frantic packing, followed by another half hour of her standing in our bedroom doorway with 2 suitcases, a small carry-on, and a much larger checked bag, looking like she was about to move to Hawaii permanently rather than attend a 3-day business consultation. Babe, I said, eyeing the luggage situation, how many outfit changes does this consultation require? She laughed, but it sounded forced. You know how it is with new clients. First impressions are everything, and I want to be prepared for any situation. Business meetings, client dinners, maybe some informal socializing. Right. Because nothing says serious business consultation like packing enough clothes for a 2-week vacation. But here's where it gets really interesting. While Lydia was upstairs having her packing meltdown, I started noticing other weird shit happening around me. My phone kept buzzing with texts, but not the usual stuff. Not work emergencies, or my mother asking if we were coming to Sunday dinner. These were different. Evasive. My brother Aaron, who normally called me at least twice a week to complain about his job or ask for advice or just shoot the shit, had suddenly gone radio silent. When I tried calling him the night before, it went straight to voicemail. When I texted him that morning asking if he wanted to grab drinks while Lydia was out of town, I got back a weirdly formal response about being tied up with work stuff, and maybe next week. Aaron works in sales for a medical device company. He's never been tied up with work stuff for more than 5 minutes in his entire life. Then there were my parents. Harold and Miriam Carter, creatures of habit, so predictable you could set your watch by their routines, suddenly didn't want to talk about Sunday dinner. When I'd called my mother the day before to confirm our usual plans, she'd been oddly distant. Oh, darling, didn't we mention? Your father and I are going out of town this weekend. Just a quick little getaway. Where are you going? Oh, just away. We'll call you when we get back. My mother has never in her life been vague about travel plans. This is a woman who will spend 20 minutes describing her grocery store route and which checkout line moved fastest. But suddenly she's being mysterious about a weekend trip, and then there was the timing. Lydia's last-minute business trip, Aaron's sudden unavailability, my parents' mysterious getaway, all happening in the same week, all announced with the same breathless urgency, all involving people who normally couldn't coordinate a pizza order without 3 planning meetings and a shared Google Calendar. But you know what I did with all these red flags? I ignored them. Because that's what you do when you're living in a perfectly curated life that you've spent 6 years building. You don't go looking for problems. You don't assume the worst about the people you love. You give them the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt is starting to feel heavier than the benefit. So I kissed my wife goodbye at the door, helped her load those suspiciously overpacked suitcases into her Audi, and waved as she drove off toward JFK and her career-defining opportunity in paradise. And then I went inside and tried to convince myself that the sick feeling in my stomach was just because I was going to miss her, not because I was pretty sure I'd just been played by a master class in collaborative deception. You know what they say about curiosity and cats? Well, turns out that old saying is complete horseshit. Sometimes curiosity doesn't kill you. Sometimes it just shows you that you were already dead and too stupid to notice. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, because at this point in the story, I still thought I was just being a concerned husband with a perfectly reasonable case of the jitters. It was Thursday night, 2 days after Lydia's dramatic departure for Hawaii, and I was sitting in my home office pretending to review budget projections while actually obsessing over the fact that my wife hadn't called. Not once. Sure, she'd sent a few texts, landed safely, and hotel is nice, Wi-Fi sucks, and client meeting went well, exhausted. But no actual phone calls. No video chats. No, I miss you, honey. Conversations that used to be standard operating procedure whenever she traveled. Which, let's be honest, wasn't that often. Lydia's idea of business travel usually involved day trips to Manhattan or maybe an overnight in Boston. Hawaii was definitely outside her normal corporate radius. But then again, crisis management probably came with a different set of rules. That's when I made the mistake that changed everything. Or maybe it was the smartest thing I'd ever done. Jury's still out on that one. I decided to check Instagram. Not Lydia's account. I already followed her there, and she'd posted exactly what I expected. A carefully curated shot of a hotel room with some generic caption about working hard in paradise and a sunset photo tag from Waikiki Beach. Standard influencer wife bullshit, nothing suspicious about it. No, I went looking for Brielle's account, because if anyone was going to be documenting every moment of their life on social media, it was my sister-in-law. The girl couldn't eat a sandwich without posting it to her story with some inspirational quote about nourishing your soul or embracing authentic moments. Brielle's main account was exactly what you'd expect. A perfectly curated grid of aesthetic breakfast bowls, motivational quotes over sunset backgrounds, and professionally lit selfies that probably took 47 attempts to get right. Her bio read something nauseating like, "Digital storyteller Sparkles, spreading positivity Sparkles, living authentically Sparkles," with a link to her latest blog post about sustainable fashion or mindful living or whatever buzzword was trending that week. But here's the thing about social media. The real stuff, the actually interesting stuff, never makes it to the main feed. That's all performance art designed to sell you something, whether it's a product or an image or a version of life that doesn't actually exist. The real stories live in the margins, in the tagged photos you didn't know existed, in the reflections caught in windows, in the split-second moments between poses when people forget they're being watched. So I started digging. Not stalking. Let's call it investigative scrolling. I clicked on every tagged photo, followed every location tag, checked every story highlight going back months. Most of it was exactly the mind-numbing content you'd expect from someone whose job was being professionally enthusiastic about nothing in particular. But then I found something weird. It was buried in the location tags from a coffee shop in Soho, hidden in a group photo from some marketing event last month. Brielle was tagged in the background, but when I clicked on her username, it didn't take me to her main account. It took me somewhere else entirely. A second account. Private, of course, but linked to what looked like a throwaway Gmail address with a string of numbers that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't supposed to find it. The username was just Brie_behind_the_scenes, with no profile picture and a follower count of exactly 17 people. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and apparently I was more desperate than I'd realized. I created a fake account, some generic male name, stock photo profile picture, bland bio about loving travel and photography. The kind of completely forgettable presence that might reasonably follow a social media person's secondary account. I sent a follow request and waited. 2 hours later, she accepted. What I found behind that digital door was like stepping into an alternate universe where everything I thought I knew about my family was just the opening act for a much more interesting show. This wasn't Brielle's professional persona with the perfect lighting and inspirational captions. This was raw, unfiltered, real, or at least as real as someone like Brielle was capable of being. The content was completely different. Instead of artfully arranged smoothie bowls, there were messy hotel rooms and candid group photos. Instead of motivational quotes, there were inside jokes and complaint sessions about clients and sarcastic commentary about the performance of perfection. It felt like looking through a window into someone's actual life instead of their highlight reel. And there, scattered throughout the recent stories like breadcrumbs leading to a very specific gingerbread house, were palm trees, white sand beaches, crystal clear water that was definitely not the murky gray Atlantic I was used to seeing on our occasional trips to the Hamptons. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Maybe Brielle was on vacation too. Maybe everyone in my family had simultaneously decided that November was the perfect time to escape to tropical paradise. Maybe I was the only idiot in Connecticut still dealing with 40-degree weather and budget projections. But then I saw the reflection. It was in a story that lasted exactly 3 seconds, Just a quick boomerang of someone clinking champagne glasses together in what looked like a restaurant overlooking the ocean. The kind of throwaway content that most people would scroll past without a second thought. But I wasn't most people anymore. I was a man whose wife had disappeared into thin air with a suspicious amount of luggage and a story that was starting to smell fishier than week-old sushi. I watched that 3-second loop over and over, frame by frame, until my eyes burned and my phone battery started dying. And there, caught in the reflection of the restaurant's window behind the champagne glasses, was a profile I would have recognized anywhere. My brother Aaron's profile. Unmistakably him. With that stupid goatee he'd been growing for the past month and the backward baseball cap, he wore everywhere like he was still 22 and trying to get into college parties. Aaron, who had been asking me about sunscreen brands and Hawaiian weather forecasts just 3 days ago. Aaron, who was supposed to be in his shitty studio apartment in Stanford, probably eating cereal for dinner and playing video games until 3 in the morning. Aaron, who was apparently sipping champagne at sunset in what looked suspiciously like the same tropical paradise where my wife was allegedly managing someone else's corporate crisis. I screenshotted that story so fast I almost dropped my phone. But wait, it gets better. Or worse, depending on how you look at it. The next story in Brielle's secret feed was another throwaway moment. Someone adjusting their hat at what looked like a poolside cabana. Again, just a few seconds of meaningless content that most people would ignore. But I was past the point of ignoring anything. The hat was straw, wide-brimmed, with a navy blue ribbon around the crown. I'd bought that exact hat for my mother last Christmas, from some boutique in Greenwich that charged $200 for what was essentially overpriced beachwear. Miriam had loved it, worn it to every outdoor event since then, always made sure to mention where it came from when other women complimented it. Julian got this for me, she'd say, adjusting the brim with that proud maternal smile. Isn't he thoughtful? So thoughtful that apparently I'd funded my own mother's participation in whatever the fuck this was turning out to be. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a group boomerang. 4 champagne flutes clinking together in slow motion, the kind of celebratory toast you make when something significant has just happened. 4 hands holding 4 glasses, and I studied those hands like I was preparing for the world's most fucked up anatomy exam. One hand had perfectly manicured nails in a shade of coral that Lydia had been obsessing over for the past month. Another hand wore my mother's wedding ring, that distinctive platinum band with the small diamond cluster that had belonged to my grandmother. The third hand was obviously masculine, wearing what looked like a class ring, or maybe. Wait, I zoomed in until the image pixelated, but I could still make out the details. It wasn't a class ring. It was my father's signet ring, the one with his initials engraved in Old English script that he'd inherited from his own father and wore every day since I was a kid. For hands. For glasses. For people who were supposed to be in 4 different places, living 4 separate lives, none of which involved tropical vacations and champagne toasts while I sat in Connecticut like the world's biggest asshole, worried about budget projections and quarterly reports. I watched that boomerang until my screen went black from inactivity. Then I plugged my phone back in and watched it again, and again, and again, until the repetitive motion of those clinking glasses started to feel like a metronome counting down to the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. The worst part? They looked happy. Really, genuinely happy in a way that none of them ever looked during our perfectly staged family gatherings back home. No forced smiles, no performative conversation, no carefully orchestrated photo ops for Instagram. Just 4 people enjoying themselves without me, having the kind of authentic good time that apparently required my complete absence to achieve. That's when I realized I wasn't looking at evidence of 4 separate betrayals. I was looking at evidence of one very carefully coordinated family vacation that somehow forgot to include the family member who'd been paying for everyone else's good times for the past 6 years. Ever have one of those moments where you suddenly understand why people lose their shit and start throwing things? Not that I'm a violent guy. Hell, the most aggressive thing I'd done in years was argue with a customer service rep about an incorrect delivery charge. But sitting there staring at my phone screen, watching my entire family toast their secret vacation with champagne I'd probably paid for, I finally got it. I understood the appeal of breaking something expensive just to hear the sound it makes when it shatters. Instead, I did what any rational, methodical, completely fucking furious operations director would do. I opened my laptop and started auditing my accounts. You see, there's one thing about being married to someone for 6 years while maintaining separate finances for independence. You tend to get a little sloppy about certain shared resources. Credit cards with authorized users. Joint access to airline accounts. Login information saved on shared devices for convenience. The kind of digital intimacy that seems romantic when you trust someone and absolutely insane when you realize that trust was misplaced. I started with American Airlines, mostly because I'm a creature of habit and they've been my carrier of choice since college. 10 years of business travel, delayed flights, middle seats between crying babies, and guys who think airplane armrests are suggestions rather than territorial boundaries. 10 years of accumulating miles the hard way, one miserable cross-country red-eye at a time. My AAdvantage account was my quiet pride and joy, my digital trophy case full of status levels and upgrade certificates, and enough banked miles to fly first class to Tokyo if I ever decided to stop being practical and start being spontaneous. Executive Platinum status, earned through countless hours in airport lounges and rental car lines and hotel check-ins that all blurred together into one long business trip punctuated by brief returns home. I logged into the account expecting to see my usual balance, somewhere around 340,000 miles, give or take a few thousand depending on recent credit card spending and quarterly bonuses. Enough for a really nice vacation, maybe 2 decent ones, or several years' worth of domestic upgrades that made business travel slightly less soul-crushing. What I found instead was a balance of 47,000 miles and a transaction history that read like a fucking crime scene. 4 first-class tickets to Honolulu, booked 6 days ago. Departure date: the same Tuesday that Lydia had her emergency client crisis. Total cost in miles: 280,000, plus taxes and fees charged to the credit card linked to the account. My credit card, obviously, because whose else would it be? The names on the reservations were masked for privacy, just initials and partial last names. But the booking details were clear as day. 4 seats in first class on the same flight, same departure time, same destination. For people traveling together on my miles, my status, my 10 years of accumulated suffering through airline food and recycled airplane air. I sat there staring at the screen for a full minute, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't just the betrayal, though that was certainly enough to send me into a homicidal rage. It was the sheer fucking audacity of it. The casual assumption that my miles were somehow community property, available for anyone in my family to use whenever they felt like taking a group vacation without me. But wait, there's more. Because apparently one coordinated act of theft wasn't enough for these people. I clicked through to the detailed transaction history and found the digital fingerprints of their planning. The tickets had been booked from my home IP address, using my stored payment information, with my TSA pre-check number for expedited security. Someone had logged into my account, browsed available flights, selected premium seats, and charged the whole thing to my card, all from the comfort of what I'd assumed was our shared home computer. The booking confirmation had been sent to my email address, then immediately deleted. I only found it because I'm compulsive about checking my trash folder, a holdover from my logistics work where deleted emails sometimes contain the only proof of why something went wrong. There it was, buried between spam messages and automated notifications. Confirmation for your American Airlines reservation. Your reservation. My reservation. The reservation I'd never made for the trip I'd never planned to the destination where I wasn't welcome. I called American Airlines customer service, because that's what you do when your account has been compromised and your entire family has stolen your miles. I expected to wait on hold for 45 minutes listening to terrible jazz music, but apparently Executive Platinum members get expedited service, even when they're calling to report that their wives are thieves. American Airlines, this is Paula. How can I help you today? Paula Kim, according to her professional introduction, supervisor in the AAdvantage customer service department, probably sitting in some call center in Texas or Arizona, dealing with entitled frequent flyers who think their status makes them royalty. I almost felt bad for what I was about to dump in her lap. Hi Paula, this is Julian Carter, account number. I rattled off my membership details, my voice surprisingly calm considering I felt like my chest was full of broken glass. I'm calling about some recent activity on my account that I didn't authorize. I'd be happy to help you with that, Mr. Carter. Let me pull up your account. Okay, I can see you're Executive Platinum. Thank you for your loyalty. What specific activity are you concerned about? 4 first-class tickets to Honolulu, booked on November 12th. I didn't book those tickets. I'm not traveling to Hawaii, and I need to understand how someone else was able to access my account and use my miles. Pause. The sound of typing, probably Paula pulling up the transaction details while trying to figure out whether she was dealing with a fraud case or a domestic dispute. Smart money was probably on domestic dispute, given the circumstances. Mr. Carter, I can see those reservations were booked from your registered IP address using your stored payment method. The system shows successful authentication with your username and password. Are you saying someone else had access to your login credentials? That's exactly what I'm saying. My wife had access to the account for legitimate reasons, shared travel planning, that sort of thing. But I never authorized her to book 4 tickets for other people using my miles. More typing, more pausing. Paula was probably consulting a supervisor or checking some internal protocol for handling family drama disguised as fraud reports. I understand your concern, Mr. Carter. Let me ask you a few verification questions to make sure I'm speaking with the account holder. Can you confirm the last 4 digits of the credit card on file? I answered her questions, all of them, proving that I was indeed Julian Carter and not some random guy trying to fuck with someone else's frequent flyer account. Social security number, previous travel history, the hotel preference saved in my profile. All the digital breadcrumbs that proved I was the rightful owner of miles that had apparently become community property without my consent. Okay, Mr. Carter, I've verified your identity. Looking at the booking details, I can confirm that 4 first-class reservations were made using your miles and charged to your credit card. The reservations are still active. The passengers haven't traveled yet. Good. I want to cancel those reservations and get my miles back. I can certainly help you with that, but I need to let you know that these are non-refundable fares. If you cancel now, there will be penalties, and you'll only recover a portion of the miles used. Non-refundable fares. Of course they were. Because why would my family steal my miles for refundable tickets when they could steal them for premium seats that locked me into their financial impact whether I liked it or not? What about changing the reservations? Could I, for example, change the names on the tickets? No, sir. Airline policy doesn't allow name changes on purchased tickets. However, I can see that the reservations were made using your platinum status for priority boarding and seat selection. Would you like me to add a note to your account requiring in-person verification for future bookings? In-person verification. The airline equivalent of telling your bank to call you before anyone uses your credit card. Humiliating, but necessary when your own family has apparently decided that your resources are theirs to distribute as they see fit. Yes, please add that note. And Paula, I want documentation of this entire transaction history. Email me everything. Booking details, IP addresses, timestamps, credit card charges. I want a complete record of how my account was accessed and used without my permission. Absolutely, Mr. Carter. I'll send you a detailed account activity report within the next hour. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Actually, yes. The people traveling on these reservations, when they check in, when they go through security, when they board the plane, they're using my status benefits, right? My priority boarding, my seat upgrades, my baggage allowances? That's correct, sir. The reservations were made using your AAdvantage number, so all associated benefits would apply to those passengers. And if I were to, hypothetically, have concerns about unauthorized use of my account, could you flag these specific reservations for additional verification at check-in? Another pause. Paula was definitely consulting someone now, probably wondering how much drama one frequent flyer account could generate. Mr. Carter, I can add a security note to your account requesting verification of the primary account holder for any future travel. For existing reservations, passengers would need to present valid identification matching the names on the tickets, but that's standard procedure anyway. Not quite what I was hoping for, but better than nothing. At least there would be a paper trail, documentation that someone had accessed my account without permission and used my accumulated miles for their secret family vacation. Perfect. Add that security note. Send me the documentation, and Paula, thank you for being so professional about what I'm sure seems like a pretty fucked up situation. You're very welcome, Mr. Carter. We appreciate your business and your loyalty to American Airlines. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at my laptop screen, watching my miles balance sit there like a monument to my own stupidity. 47,000 miles. Enough for a domestic first-class ticket, maybe a coach seat to Europe if I was willing to deal with a few connections. Not enough for the kind of trip my family was apparently taking with money that used to be mine. The email from Paula arrived 37 minutes later, complete with booking confirmations, transaction histories, and IP logs that painted a clear picture of exactly how thoroughly I'd been played. For first-class seats, for people who were supposed to be somewhere else, and one husband sitting in Connecticut finally understanding that his marriage wasn't the only lie he'd been living. There's something weirdly liberating about discovering that your entire life is a lie. Not the discovery part. That fucking sucks. But what comes after? That moment when you realize you don't have to play by the rules of a game that was rigged against you from the start. When you understand that the people you've been protecting don't deserve your protection, and the responsibilities you've been shouldering were never actually yours to carry. I didn't sleep Thursday night. Not even a little bit. Instead, I sat in my home office with a legal pad, 3 different laptops, and the kind of cold, calculating focus that usually made my colleagues at Meridian Logistics nervous during budget meetings. Except this time, instead of optimizing supply chains and delivery schedules, I was systematically dismantling the financial infrastructure that had been supporting everyone else's good time at my expense. You want to know the difference between anger and rage? Anger makes you want to break things. Rage makes you want to build things. Specifically, walls that are tall enough and thick enough to keep the people who hurt you from ever being able to hurt you again. I started with the joint checking account, the one Lydia and I had set up 3 years ago for household expenses and shared financial goals. In theory, it was supposed to make our marriage more collaborative. In practice, it had turned into a slush fund that she used for whatever the hell she wanted while I dutifully transferred money from my primary account every month like some kind of automated ATM. The balance was $47,000, accumulated over years of my contributions and very few actual household expenses. $47,000 that was technically ours, but had been funded entirely by me, sitting there like a big red emergency button waiting for someone to push it. So I pushed it. Electronic transfer to my individual checking account, authorized by my username and password, completely legal and absolutely final. The joint account went from a healthy 5-figure balance to exactly $0.00 in the time it took me to type in my routing numbers. Next up were the credit cards. We had 3 shared accounts, American Express, Visa, and a MasterCard from our local credit union that offered better interest rates on large purchases. All 3 had Lydia listed as an authorized user, which had seemed like such a reasonable arrangement when we were young and stupid and thought love meant sharing everything. I called each company's customer service line, navigated through their automated phone trees like I was running an obstacle course, and systematically removed her authorization from every account. The Amex representative tried to talk me out of it, explaining that authorized users often need access for emergency situations and family convenience. "Ma'am," I said to the customer service rep, who was probably reading from a script designed to prevent messy domestic disputes from becoming billing nightmares. "The emergency situation is that my authorized user is currently in Hawaii, using my miles and my money without my permission. The family convenience she needs is to learn how to pay for her own fucking vacations. Authorized user privileges revoked. Account access terminated. New cards issued with different numbers, which would make any saved payment information completely useless. But credit cards were just the appetizer. The main course was our investment accounts, the retirement funds, the carefully constructed financial portfolio that I'd been building since my first job out of college. Most of it was in my name anyway, but there were beneficiary designations, joint ownership agreements, and various legal documents that gave Lydia access to my money in case I got hit by a bus or had a heart attack during a particularly stressful quarterly review. I'd always thought of those documents as romantic gestures, proof that I trusted her with my financial future. Now they felt more like suicide notes I'd written while drunk on the idea that marriage meant permanent loyalty. Time to sober up. I updated every beneficiary designation, changed every access authorization, and revoked every financial power of attorney that had Lydia's name on it. My retirement accounts, my investment portfolio, my life insurance policy, all of it locked down tighter than a Swiss bank account, accessible only by me or the lawyers I hadn't hired yet, but probably would need soon. The house was trickier because we both had our names on the deed and the mortgage. I couldn't just lock her out of property she technically co-owned, but I could make some adjustments to ensure that I'd know if she tried to come back while I wasn't home. Smart locks are beautiful things when you're married to someone you trust. They're even more beautiful when you're married to someone you don't. I changed all the entry codes and set up notifications that would ping my phone every time a door opened or closed. I installed security cameras at every entrance, configured to record both video and audio, because if my wife and my family wanted to have dramatic confrontations in my driveway, I figured I might as well have evidence of whatever they said. Then I called Noah Burke. Noah's the kind of lawyer you hope you never need, but you're grateful as hell to have when your life goes sideways. Family law, divorce proceedings, asset protection, all the legal specialties that help people pick up the pieces when love turns into warfare. I'd met him at a charity golf tournament 5 years ago, back when I thought lawyers were just people who made simple things complicated for billable hours. Turns out, lawyers are people who make complicated things simple when everyone else is trying to fuck you over. Julian, Noah said when I called his direct line at 11:30 p.m., because apparently successful divorce attorneys don't keep normal business hours. This is either very good news or very bad news, and given that you're calling me at midnight on a Thursday, I'm guessing it's not good news. Noah, I need an emergency consultation. How quickly can you see me? How emergency are we talking? Like, someone's threatening you emergency, or someone's threatening your bank account emergency? Someone already robbed my bank account, stole my airline miles, and is currently drinking champagne in Hawaii with my brother and my parents while lying to me about a business trip. Pause. The sound of Noah probably reaching for a legal pad and a very strong cup of coffee, because this was clearly going to be one of those conversations that required documentation and caffeine. Jesus Christ, Julian. Okay, I can see you first thing tomorrow morning. But let me ask you something right now. Have you done anything stupid yet? Sent angry texts, confronted anyone, made any financial moves that could be construed as vindictive? I moved money from our joint account to my individual account, canceled her authorized user status on my credit cards, and updated my beneficiary designations. All legal, all within my rights as the account holder. Good. Smart. Keep doing smart things and stop doing anything that could be interpreted as emotional retaliation. What else do you have? I told him about the Instagram evidence, the airline records, the documentation Paula had sent me from American Airlines. I told him about the lies, the coordination, the months of weird behavior that suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of a family conspiracy. Julian, listen to me very carefully. This is not just a cheating spouse situation. This is systematic financial abuse combined with coordinated deception involving multiple family members. You're going to need 3 things: a clean financial perimeter, neutral witnesses, and your restraint. I can give you the first 2. The third one might be negotiable. The third one is non-negotiable. You stay calm, you stay smart, and you let me handle the legal strategy. Can you do that? I thought about my wife laughing in some Hawaiian restaurant, toasting her successful deception with champagne I'd paid for. I thought about my brother asking me about sunscreen while planning to steal my vacation. I thought about my parents, who'd raised me to believe that family loyalty was sacred, teaching me that lesson right up until the moment they decided I wasn't family enough to include in their tropical getaway. Yeah, Noah, I can stay calm, but I want them to understand that calm doesn't mean weak, and smart doesn't mean forgiving. Understood. I'll see you at 8 a.m. sharp, and Julian, bring everything. Every document, every screenshot, every piece of evidence you've collected. We're going to build a case that's so airtight they'll need a fucking submarine to find a way out of it. After I hung up with Noah, I sat back in my desk chair and looked around my home office. My space, my sanctuary, the room where I'd spent countless hours building the career that funded everyone else's dreams. The degrees on the wall, the industry awards, the family photos that suddenly looked like evidence of crimes I'd been too trusting to recognize. I took down the photo of Lydia and me from our anniversary dinner last year, the one where we're both smiling like we're the happiest people in the world. I studied it for a moment, trying to remember what it felt like to believe that smile was real. then slid it face down into my desk drawer next to the airline documentation. Some things are worth preserving for evidence. Some things are worth preserving for memory. Most things, it turns out, are worth preserving for neither. You know what they don't tell you about planning revenge? It's actually a lot like planning a wedding, except instead of coordinating flowers and photographers, you're coordinating lawyers and witnesses, and the perfect moment to watch someone's face realize their whole world just went to shit. The attention to detail is remarkably similar, though the guest list is significantly more hostile. I spent Friday morning in Noah Burke's office, which looked exactly like what Central Casting would order if they needed a set for successful divorce attorney. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books that probably cost more than most people's cars, and diplomas from impressive universities arranged just so behind his desk. Noah himself was mid-50s, silver-haired, and had the kind of calm confidence that comes from watching hundreds of marriages explode and knowing exactly how to sweep up the debris. "Julian," he said after reviewing my documentation for the third time, "this is either the most clear-cut case of financial infidelity I've seen in 20 years, or your wife is significantly smarter than her Instagram account suggests." "What do you mean?" "I mean she's left a digital paper trail that a first-year law student could follow. The airline records, the social media evidence, the credit card charges. It's like she wanted to get caught. Either she's incredibly sloppy, or this is some kind of elaborate setup." I thought about that for a moment, running through the timeline in my head. Lydia wasn't stupid, manipulative, sure, and apparently a pathological liar, but not stupid. So why had she been so careless about covering her tracks? Maybe she thought I was too trusting to look. Or maybe she thought you were too weak to do anything about it, even if you found out. Noah leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with the kind of professional assessment that probably cost $300 an hour. "The question is, what do you want the outcome to be?" "I want them to understand that actions have consequences. I want them to face the truth in public, without being able to spin it or lie their way out of it. And I want to make sure this never happens to me again." Noah nodded, making notes on his legal pad. "Achievable goals. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to let them come home. Let them think they got away with it. Let them settle back into their normal routines and start planning their next deception. That sounds like letting them win. That sounds like giving them enough rope to hang themselves. Julian, right now you have evidence of a secret vacation and some suspicious financial activity. What you don't have is evidence of how they're going to handle the aftermath. Are they going to lie to your face? Are they going to gaslight you? Are they going to try to make you think you're crazy for being suspicious?" I could see where he was going with this. The crime was bad, but the cover-up would be worse. And the cover-up would happen in real time, in front of witnesses, with no plausible deniability. "You want me to give them a chance to lie to me. I want you to give them a chance to lie to everyone. Because here's the thing about liars, Julian, they can't help themselves. They'll double down, they'll elaborate, they'll add details that contradict their previous stories. And they'll do it in front of people who matter." That's when Noah outlined what he called the welcome committee strategy. Instead of confronting them privately, where they could control the narrative and minimize the damage, we were going to arrange a very public homecoming. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just public. With witnesses who couldn't be dismissed or ignored. "We need 3 types of people," Noah explained, ticking them off on his fingers. "Professional contacts who can document their behavior, personal contacts who can attest to your character, and neutral parties who have no investment in protecting anyone's reputation." For the professional contacts, he suggested I reach out to Paula Kim at American Airlines, the customer service supervisor who'd helped me document the unauthorized use of my miles. She'd already expressed concerns about the account security issues, and Noah thought she might be willing to verify the booking details in person if we could arrange it. "Airlines take fraud seriously," he said. "If we can get her to flag the reservations for additional verification at arrival, it creates an official paper trail and puts your family in the position of having to explain why they're traveling on tickets they didn't pay for." For the personal contacts, Noah suggested I involve someone from our church, someone who knew all of us and could witness whatever story they tried to tell about their vacation. Reverend Thomas Avery was the obvious choice. He'd known my family for years, had counseled us through various minor crises, and had the kind of moral authority that made lying to him particularly uncomfortable. "Religious leaders make excellent witnesses," Noah noted. "They're trained to recognize deception, They're credible in legal proceedings, and most people find it psychologically difficult to lie directly to clergy. For the neutral parties, he suggested I involve someone from work, preferably someone in a position of authority who could observe and document without being accused of bias. My HR director, Janet Ortiz, was perfect for this role, professional, unflappable, and smart enough to recognize a shitshow when she saw one. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would meet them at the airport when they returned from Hawaii, accompanied by my carefully selected witnesses. Not to confront them, not to accuse them of anything, but simply to welcome them home and hear their stories about their respective trips. Let them lie, Noah said. Let them elaborate. Let them dig their own graves with their own words, in front of people who will remember every detail. And then, when the lies become unsustainable, we present the evidence and watch them try to explain why they thought stealing from you was acceptable behavior. There was one more element to the plan, though, and this one was my contribution. I wanted Marcus Lee there. Marcus was our head of security at Meridian Logistics, a former cop who transitioned into corporate security after 20 years of dealing with actual criminals. He was quiet, observant, and had the kind of presence that made people think twice about whatever bullshit they were planning to pull. More importantly, he owed me a favor from the time I'd helped get his daughter an internship with one of our client companies. You want security there? Noah asked when I mentioned Marcus. I want someone there who understands how confrontations escalate and knows how to de-escalate them if necessary. I also want someone there who can't be intimidated or manipulated by emotional outbursts. Smart. Very smart. What about your friend Priya? The one you mentioned who knows about your marriage problems. Priya Patel had been my closest friend since business school, the kind of person who'd seen me at my worst and still answered her phone when I called. She was also a forensic accountant with a specialty in financial fraud, which made her uniquely qualified to understand exactly what my family had done to me and why it mattered. Priya stays in the background, I decided. She's there to observe and to keep me grounded, but she doesn't engage unless I specifically need her to. By the time I left Noah's office, we had a plan that was detailed, professional, and completely legal. No ambushes, no dramatic confrontations, no emotional outbursts that could be used against me later. Just a carefully orchestrated moment of truth where four people who thought they were smarter than me would discover that intelligence isn't the same thing as wisdom, and wisdom isn't the same thing as character. I called Paula Kim at American Airlines first. She remembered our conversation from Thursday night and was genuinely concerned about the security implications of unauthorized account access. Mr. Carter, I've been thinking about your situation, she said. The more I review the booking details, the more problematic this looks from a fraud prevention perspective. Would it be helpful if I was present when the passengers attempt to check in for their return flight? Actually, Paula, they're returning tomorrow. Would it be possible for you to meet them at arrival instead? I'd like to have an official airline representative present when I ask them about their trip. I can do that. I'll bring the account documentation and a colleague from our fraud prevention team. This is exactly the kind of case we use for training purposes, family members using accounts without authorization. Reverend Avery was my next call, and he was surprisingly receptive to the idea of witnessing what he diplomatically called a family reconciliation moment. Julian, he said, I've been in ministry for 30 years, and I've learned that the truth has a way of revealing itself when people are given the space to speak freely. If your family has something to explain about their recent activities, I'd be honored to provide pastoral support during that conversation. Janet Ortiz was the easiest sell of all. As HR director, she dealt with workplace drama on a weekly basis and had developed a professional appreciation for well-documented conflicts. Julian, you've been distracted at work for weeks, and now I understand why. If you need a witness for what sounds like a significant personal situation, I'm happy to help. Just promise me you're not planning anything that could reflect poorly on the company. Janet, I'm planning something that will reflect poorly on people who deserve it. The company has nothing to worry about. Marcus agreed without even asking for details. You need backup for something? You've got it. What time and where? By Friday evening, I had assembled what Noah called the most professional welcome committee in Connecticut legal history. 5 people who would observe, document, and witness whatever story my family tried to tell about their magical mystery tour to Hawaii. The only question left was whether they'd try to lie their way out of it. or if they'd surprise me with something resembling honesty. Given their track record, I wasn't betting on honesty. There's something deeply satisfying about packing a single backpack when you're used to managing other people's baggage, literal and metaphorical. Saturday morning, while my family was presumably enjoying their final day of tropical paradise funded by my decades of airline loyalty, I stood in my walk-in closet and realized I'd been carrying dead weight for a lot longer than just the past week. The closet was a monument to our marriage, or at least to the version of our marriage that existed for public consumption. His and her sections, perfectly organized, color-coordinated, with enough designer clothing to stock a small boutique. Lydia's side took up about 70% of the space, which had always seemed reasonable since women's fashion required more variety than men's business casual. Now it looked like evidence of a financial relationship where one person did all the earning and the other did all the spending. I pulled out my old hiking backpack, the one I'd used in college before I knew that adults were supposed to own matching luggage sets and worry about thread counts and whether their shoes conveyed the right message about their socioeconomic status. It felt good in my hands, solid, practical, designed for people who actually went places instead of just posting pictures of places on Instagram. Into the backpack went 3 days' worth of clothes, basic toiletries, my laptop, and the folder containing every piece of evidence Noah and I had compiled. Everything else, the Brooks Brothers suits, the Italian leather shoes, the expensive watches that marked anniversaries and promotions, could stay right where it was. Physical reminders of a life I was apparently too stupid to realize I'd been living alone. But first, I had some redecorating to do. The hallway leading from our front door to the living room was lined with family photos, a carefully curated gallery of our allegedly happy life together. Wedding pictures where we both looked young and optimistic and completely fucking clueless. Anniversary dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford but paid for anyway. Holiday gatherings where everyone smiled like they meant it. Vacation photos from trips that I planned, booked, and financed while other people collected memories and Instagram content. I started with our anniversary photo from last year, the Amalfi Coast trip that had cost me $15,000 and 3 weeks of vacation time. We're sitting at some overpriced restaurant overlooking the Mediterranean, both of us tan and relaxed, and playing the part of successful American tourists who definitely belonged in places that charged €50 for pasta. Lydia's wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and I'm wearing the kind of forced smile that comes from spending your entire vacation worried about credit card bills. I took that photo down first, studying our faces for signs of the deception that was apparently already in motion. Had she been planning this Hawaiian adventure even then? Had she been sitting across from me at that overpriced Italian restaurant, calculating how much of my money she could steal without me noticing? The photo went face down into my desk drawer, right next to the airline documentation and screenshots of Brielle's secret Instagram account. Evidence for the prosecution, Your Honor. Exhibit A. The defendant pretending to love the plaintiff while actively planning to rob him blind. Next came the family Christmas photo from 3 years ago, back when I still believed that Harold and Miriam Carter were the kind of parents who raised their children to value honesty and loyalty. We're all wearing matching red sweaters, because apparently my mother thought we were starring in some kind of holiday greeting card commercial, and everyone's laughing at something Aaron said. Probably a joke about how naive I was, though I'd thought it was just brotherly teasing at the time. Face down into the drawer. Then the photo from Harold's 70th birthday party, where I'd spent $3,000 on a surprise celebration at the country club and listened to speech after speech about the importance of family and tradition and taking care of the people you love. My father's wearing the same signet ring I'd spotted in Brielle's Hawaiian boomerang, and he's got his arm around me like I'm his pride and joy instead of his personal ATM. Face down into the drawer. By the time I was finished, the hallway looked like a crime scene where someone had systematically executed every happy memory in the house. Blank spots on the wall where our life used to hang. Nail holes that looked like bullet wounds. The ghostly outlines of frames marking the places where I used to believe I belonged. The living room got the same treatment. Wedding photos, vacation pictures, candid shots of us looking domestic and content. All of it disappeared into boxes or drawers or the growing pile of evidence that would probably end up in divorce court. What remained were the neutral pieces, artwork we'd bought together, furniture that didn't tell stories, The kind of impersonal decor you'd find in a hotel room or a staged house listing. It looked empty. It looked honest. It looked like what our marriage had probably always been underneath all the performance art and carefully curated social media content. The smart lock on the front door was the last thing I changed, scrolling through the app on my phone to delete Lydia's access code and set up new notifications. From now on, every time someone entered or left the house, I'd get a ping on my phone with a timestamp and a photo. No more surprise visits. No more convenient excuses. No more pretending that shared spaces meant shared trust. I also installed new security cameras at every entrance, discreet little devices that could record both video and audio without being obvious about it. If my family wanted to have dramatic confrontations in my driveway, if they wanted to gaslight me or threaten me or try to turn me into the villain of their story, I figured I might as well have evidence of exactly what they said and how they said it. Legal protection, Noah had called it. CYA documentation for when the emotional manipulation started and people began accusing me of being unreasonable or vindictive or whatever label they thought would make me back down. The funny thing about installing security cameras in your own home is how it makes you see the space differently. Suddenly you're thinking about sight lines and audio pickup and whether someone could approach your front door without being recorded. You start to realize how vulnerable you've been, how much you've taken on faith, how many ways someone could hurt you if they really wanted to. I wasn't paranoid. I was finally paying attention. By noon, the house felt like mine again in a way it hadn't in months. Clean lines, clear purposes, no bullshit decoration designed to impress people who were apparently laughing at me behind my back anyway. It felt like the kind of space where a man could think clearly, make decisions based on facts instead of emotions, plan his next move without worrying about who might be watching over his shoulder. I left through the front door at exactly 2:30 p.m., my backpack slung over one shoulder and my car keys in my hand. The smart lock clicked behind me with the kind of finality that sounded like a judge's gavel, official and irreversible and absolutely fucking satisfying. No note on the kitchen counter explaining where I'd gone or when I'd be back. No text message to Lydia asking about her client meetings or whether she was having a nice time in paradise. No phone calls to Aaron or my parents asking about their mysterious travel plans. Just silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than accusations, that asks questions without giving away what you already know, that lets other people fill in the blanks with their own guilt and paranoia. I'd spent 6 years being the guy who always reached out first, who smoothed over conflicts, who made sure everyone else was comfortable even when I wasn't. The guy who funded other people's dreams and called it generosity instead of recognizing it as enabling. Time to try a different approach. My phone buzzed as I pulled out of the driveway. A notification from Brielle's secret Instagram account. Another story, probably more champagne and sunset photos from people who thought they were too clever to get caught. I glanced at the notification but didn't open it. Whatever they were posting from their last day in paradise could wait. I had an appointment at the airport, and 4 people who were about to discover that silence, when used properly, cuts deeper than words. There's something almost religious about airport arrival gates. All that desperate hope and nervous energy. People checking their phones and craning their necks toward the jetway doors, waiting for someone to emerge from the sky and validate their faith that distance doesn't have to mean separation. Families reuniting after months apart. Business travelers returning to spouses who've been holding down the fort. Lovers meeting after long separations with flowers and tears and promises about never being apart that long again. And then there's me, standing there in my navy jacket and what Noah called my courtroom shoes, the kind of polished leather that says you're serious about whatever's about to happen, waiting for my wife and my family to walk through those doors so I can destroy their lives with the truth. JFK Terminal 5 at 6:30 on a Saturday evening in November is its own special kind of purgatory. Too early for the Sunday crowd, too late for the business travelers, just the right time for people returning from vacations they couldn't afford with money they didn't earn. The arrival board showed Hawaiian Airlines Flight 382 had landed 12 minutes early, which meant my carefully orchestrated welcome committee had about 10 minutes to get into position before the show started. Paula Kim from American Airlines arrived first, looking exactly like what central casting would order for a competent airline supervisor dealing with fraud case. Mid-40s, perfectly pressed uniform, carrying a leather portfolio that probably contained enough documentation to sink a small country. She brought a colleague from their fraud prevention team, a younger guy named David who looked like he took this shit very seriously and had probably been briefed on the legal implications of unauthorized account access. Mr. Carter, Paula said, shaking my hand with the kind of professional grip that meant business. I've reviewed the case file again, and I want you to know that American Airlines considers this a serious breach of account security. We've flagged the reservations for additional verification, and we'll need to confirm the identity of all passengers before they can claim any future benefits from your account. Appreciated, Paula. And just to be clear, I'm not looking for anyone to get arrested or charged with crimes. I just want them to understand that actions have consequences, and lying to me about their whereabouts while using my resources is going to cost them more than they thought. Reverend Thomas Avery showed up next, dressed in civilian clothes, but carrying himself with that unmistakable pastoral authority that made everyone within 20 feet feel like they should probably examine their recent behavior and maybe think about going to confession. He'd known my family for 6 years, had officiated at our wedding, had counseled us through the usual marital adjustments that all couples go through when they discover that loving someone doesn't automatically make living with them easy. Julian, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder in that way that ministers do when they want to offer comfort, but also assess your spiritual temperature. I want you to know that I'm here to support whatever healing needs to happen. But I'm also here as a witness to truth, and sometimes truth requires courage that feels like cruelty. Janet Ortiz arrived precisely on time, because Janet approached everything in her life with the same systematic efficiency that had made her the best HR director Meridian Logistics had ever had. She looked like she was about to conduct a very important performance review, which wasn't far from the truth. Julian, I've cleared my schedule for the next 2 hours, she said, checking her phone with the kind of professional focus that meant she was treating this like a work assignment. Whatever happens here, you'll have a neutral witness who can document the conversation and attest to everyone's behavior. Marcus Lee was the last to arrive, and he didn't say much beyond a nod and a quiet, "You good?" that somehow managed to convey both support and readiness to handle whatever fuckery was about to unfold. Marcus had the kind of calm presence that came from 20 years of dealing with people at their absolute worst, and he positioned himself about 10 feet behind me where he could observe everything without being threatening. Priya Patel was already there, sitting in one of those uncomfortable airport chairs with her laptop open, pretending to work while actually documenting everything with the kind of detailed attention that forensic accountants bring to financial crime scenes. She'd insisted on staying in the background unless I specifically needed her expertise, but I could see her watching the arrival gate with the intensity of someone who understood exactly how much money was involved in this little family drama. At 6:47 p.m. exactly, the jetway doors opened and passengers started streaming out of Hawaiian Airlines Flight 382. First came the usual suspects, business travelers with their rolling carry-ons and exhausted expressions, families with small children and too much luggage, elderly couples moving slowly and talking about how much they missed their own beds. And then came my family. They emerged from the jetway like they were walking off the set of a tourism commercial, all tanned and relaxed, and glowing with that particular satisfaction that comes from a week of being somewhere beautiful while someone else pays for it. Lydia was wearing white linen pants and a flowing top that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Her hair perfectly tousled in that way that screams, "I just spent a week at an expensive resort, and I want everyone to know it." Aaron looked like he'd gained 10 pounds of tropical leisure, wearing a Hawaiian shirt that was so aggressively vacation-themed it belonged in a fucking museum, carrying what appeared to be several bags of duty-free purchases that he definitely couldn't afford on his startup salary. My parents looked happy, genuinely, authentically happy in a way I hadn't seen from them in years. Harold was wearing a golf shirt with a logo I didn't recognize, probably from some Resort Pro shop, and Miriam was glowing with the kind of relaxed contentment that comes from a week of being waited on by people whose job it is to make you feel important. All 4 of them were laughing about something, probably some inside joke from their secret family bonding experience, completely oblivious to the fact that their audience had expanded significantly since they'd left Connecticut. They stopped laughing the moment they saw me. It was like watching a movie scene where someone hits the pause button. for faces transitioning from joy to confusion to something that looked suspiciously like guilt, all in the space of about 3 seconds. For people who had been moving with the confidence of successful conspirators suddenly realizing that their conspiracy might have been discovered. "Welcome home," I said, and my voice carried across the arrival area with the kind of calm authority that made several other travelers turn to see what was happening. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear and unmistakable, and loaded with implications they were only beginning to understand. Lydia recovered first, because Lydia was always good in a crisis as long as the crisis didn't involve telling the truth. "Julian, oh my God, what a surprise. What are you doing here?" She moved toward me like she was going to kiss me, then seemed to notice Paula and David and Reverend Avery, and suddenly realized that this wasn't just a coincidental airport encounter. Aaron looked like he was trying to disappear into his ridiculous Hawaiian shirt, which was impossible because the shirt was loud enough to be seen from orbit. My father was doing that thing he did when he was trying to figure out whether he was in trouble or just confused, straightening his shoulders and putting on his reasonable authority figure, face that usually worked in business settings but was completely useless in family disasters. My mother was staring at me with the expression of someone who'd just realized that her carefully planned surprise party had turned into a surprise audit. That's when Paula Kim stepped forward with her airline documentation and her professional smile and her complete lack of patience for family bullshit. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the group with the kind of polite authority that flight attendants use when they're about to kick someone off a plane. "I'm Paula Kim from American Airlines Customer Service. We have some questions about the reservations for this flight that were made using Mr. Carter's AAdvantage account." She looked directly at Lydia, then at Aaron, then at my parents, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. "Due to security concerns regarding unauthorized account access, we need to verify the identity of all passengers and confirm that the primary account holder authorized these bookings. Mr. Carter, did you personally authorize the use of your miles for these 4 passengers?" For faces staring at me, waiting for my response. For people who had spent a week drinking champagne and eating expensive food and enjoying tropical sunsets while lying to me about where they were and what they were doing. "No, Paula," I said, looking directly at my wife while speaking to the airline representative, "I did not authorize the use of my miles for these passengers. In fact, I was told that only one of them was traveling, and I was told she was traveling for business purposes, not vacation." And that's when the fury started. "Julian, what the hell is this?" Lydia hissed, her vacation glow disappearing faster than her fake story about client emergencies. "Why are you doing this to us?" "Us," I said, and the word came out like I was tasting something spoiled. "That's interesting. When did we become an us that included my brother and my parents on your business trip to Hawaii?" My mother tried to inject some maternal authority into the situation. "Julian, sweetheart, this isn't the place for." "For what, Mom? For honesty? For asking why you told me you were going out of town without saying where, while you were actually using my miles to fly first class to Hawaii?" My father cleared his throat, preparing to deploy whatever bullshit explanation he'd been rehearsing during the flight home. "Son, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We can explain everything if you'll just—" "Oh, I'd love an explanation, Dad. I'd love to hear how you ended up wearing your signet ring in Brielle's secret Instagram stories, while Mom's anniversary hat showed up poolside at a resort I've never been to." Aaron tried his usual approach of deflecting with humor. "Dude, you're being paranoid. We can totally explain." "Explain what, Aaron?" "Explain why you were asking me about sunscreen and Hawaiian weather while pretending you didn't know that's where everyone was going. Explain why you've been avoiding my calls for weeks while planning to steal my vacation." That's when Marcus stepped forward, not threatening, just present, and suddenly everyone realized that this wasn't just a family argument that could be handled with the usual mix of manipulation and gaslighting. Security retagged their luggage for inspection. Paula and David began documenting everything for their fraud report. Reverend Avery watched with the patient attention of someone who had seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times in different families with different lies, but the same fundamental failure of character. And in the middle of all that official attention and documented consequence, my family finally began to understand that their little vacation had cost them significantly more than they'd realized. There's a beautiful moment that happens when liars realize their stories have collapsed. Not the moment when they get caught, but the moment afterward when they understand that all their careful planning and coordinated deception has turned into a public spectacle that's going to follow them for years. It's like watching someone's face when they step off what they thought was a curb and discover it's actually a cliff. By morning, the rest fell like dominoes. With counsel from Noah Burke, I filed for legal separation citing misuse of assets and deception, attached with airline records and social media captures. I removed Aaron from the line of credit he had begged me to co-sign just for his startup. My parents lost my monthly support and the club dues I'd been covering for years in silence. At church, I gave one short statement to the board. I will not lie to keep appearances. The board thanked me. The Reverend offered pastoral care to everyone, not just me. Lydia tried rage, then tears, then negotiation. We can fix this, she said outside the courthouse. We, I answered, is a word that left the house when I did. A year later, I live in a smaller apartment that fits my chest better than the big house ever did. I run in the mornings, keep my own calendar, and drink coffee I grind myself. My company promoted Janet. We opened 2 new distribution hubs. I stand on loading docks more than I sit in boardrooms. I still see Reverend Avery. We talk about boundaries and mercy as separate things that can live in the same room. Lydia moved out of Greenwich quietly. Aaron says he's rebuilding. My parents write sometimes. I answer sometimes. Brielle deleted her secret account. Before she did, she sent me a message. I'm sorry. I thought clout was love. I didn't reply. On my phone, my airline app shows a healthy balance of miles again. I don't hoard them this time. I book 1 ticket at a time. And when I sit by the window, I watch the city shrink and say to myself, not as a threat, but as a promise. Silence carried me when shouting could not. When people ask how it ended, I tell them the truth. It ended at arrivals, under bad lighting and public air, with 4 faces furious and 1 man calm.